option offered, but it is not something that I would want to live through. And number 11 is Far Cry 2, which has a pretty obvious explanation for why your character doesn't want to do a lot of wandering around. They have malaria, so you need access to medicine if you want to, actually live. Occasionally your character suffers malaria attacks during the story, which also seem to happen if you wander too far outside the map. If you're on foot, you'll just collapse and wake up back in the map area, where if you're driving, the game sort of just awkwardly fades out after a while. Same thing happens, you wake up in the map area, but the vehicle is gone. And number 10 is Serious Sam 3, a series known for really large open areas, and in previous games they like to hide secrets out in the distant corners of the map, so it's likely somebody playing this game might want to see what happens when they walk out in the Egyptian desert. They probably did not expect what happens though. A giant sandworm busts out of the ground and just kills you instantly, and there's no way to actually fight it. It's just there to kill you and that is it. But the game likes to hide secrets that are just outside the edge of the map, so if you want to get all those secrets, you gotta be quick. And number 9 is The Darkness, a game set in the city, so there aren't a lot of places they could put invisible walls except for the subway. If you're feeling adventurous, it's possible to go down these tunnels, and eventually The Darkness warns you to turn back if you go far enough, but if you keep going, the screen just turns dark before a train appears out of nowhere and runs you over. It's actually pretty clever. And number 8 is Valheim. A lot of survival games have procedural maps that just keep going on forever, but Valheim has a pretty solid endpoint to its map. If you manage to get a longboat, and it's possible to head outside the bounds of the world where the water gets very turbulent. It's tough going, but if you keep heading outside, you'll eventually hit the literal edge of the world. In Valheim, at least, flat Earth is real, and if you get too close, the current will just suck you right off the edge. And number 7 is the Talos Principle. The start of this game is pretty mysterious. All you've got is a voice in your head and a big open world to wander around in. And in certain areas, it's pretty easy to wander outside the main area of the map. Get too far off course, and Elohim, the voice of God in your head, will start repeating this message, basically telling you to turn back. Your vision then starts to glitch. His voice gets louder and louder, the further out of bounds you go, until the game just finally kills you and resets your position. To explain this one fully would be a spoiler for the game, but there is a reason why this happens. Like, it's a plot justified invisible wall, which is something, again, we don't really see a whole lot of. At number 6, certain Halo 3 multiplayer maps do something a little different for invisible walls. Most games just give you a warning message and a countdown, but if you wander out of the arena on Sand Trap, you'll have to deal with constantly exploding landmines. If you have a vehicle, it's actually possible to avoid them, at least for a little while. Another similar map actually has a skull hidden outside the map, while in Snowbound, there's turrets that will shoot at you if you go beyond the barrier. Like, step outside the boundary and alarms will sound and these giant plasma turrets will just start blasting at you, which is pretty good incentive to stay on the map. And number 5 is the Jak and Daxter series. All 3 of the Jak and Daxter games have something in it to keep you from going too far off the map. In the first game, there was a lurker shark that would appear if you went out onto the water, with a faux Jaws soundtrack that plays and everything. Second game, perimeter defense robot. While in the third game, if you try to swim out too far in the lake, a giant purple tentacle will appear to stop you. They're all silly and memorable, which is, that's cool. And number 4 is Paper Mario, the Origami King. Another cute one. One chapter is all about exploring this area called the Great Sea. Like, it's a huge open area, but if you do go outside the map, the game will stop you by having a giant blooper appear, holding a sign with a red X on it. He blocks any and all progression from that point. It's basically an invisible wall, but it's kind of funny because it's a Mario character holding a big sign with a red X on it. It's more charming than just an invisible wall. And number 3 is Resident Evil, kind of a classic one. In Resident Evil, a lot of players' first instinct is to just leave the mansion. You can try, but if you try to open the front door, there's a short cutscene that plays showing a bunch of zombie dogs blocking your escape. And if you're playing the remake, one of them even gets inside, so opening the door actually makes things worse for you. After killing the dog, your character will just straight up refuse to try to open the door again. So this is the game's way of saying, like, oh yeah, you're trapped in here. Don't do that. You don't want to go out there. At least in here, you don't have to run from dogs all the time. Out there, you're going to have to do that. And number 2, we've got Spore, which during the creature stage, when you've got direct control of a single creature on the land, it's possible to swim out into the water if you want, but it's also probably not a good idea. If you get too far from the land, a short cutscene will play, which shows a gigantic sea monster swallowing your critter whole. Of course, that doesn't actually kill it. Your creature appears back on the shore safe and sound, but they really make sure you know to stay out of the water. And finally, at number 1 is Mother 3, probably the most ridiculous invisible wall of all time. There's a lot of moments in RPGs where the game won't let you go in certain directions, and Mother 3 is no exception. The difference is that instead of just having a generic, I don't want to go that way message, or someone blocking your way, instead, you start going in a direction the game doesn't want you to go, you get this message. There are ants at your feet. You might accidentally step on them, so please don't continue in that direction. The Mother games have an unusual sense of humor, to say the least, and I would say this is kind of a perfect example, this explanation of why you can't continue. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable all notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconHero. We'll see you next time right here on GameFix. We love secret rooms in games. They're bizarre, they're usually filled with tons of in-jokes, and they're typically pretty hard to find. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and it's time for 10 ridiculous secret rooms in recent games, Part 2. Now, Part 2 implies there's a Part 1, and if you're interested in the secret rooms in Mortal Kombat 11, RDR2, Bloodborne, Doom, Fallout 76, Dying Light, Hitman, Just Cause, Bloodstained, and Undertale, Part 1 is waiting for you after you get through this one, so go check that out. Starting off at number 10, it's Dying Light 2's Doom Secret Room, which is wild. This is a very recent game, not even a month old, and Dying Light 2 has a bizarre Easter egg. Like the first Dying Light had one, Super Mario Brothers World 1-1 Secret Room. But now that we have the sequel, we're finding stuff big and bizarre in similar veins. It's harder to get into this one though. You find it by going to the basement of the VNC tower, which you can access by taking the elevator and finding a door that is open for whatever reason. Now the door is locked until you actually beat the game, so that alone makes it a tougher secret room compared to the one of the first, which you find by just interacting with a green pipe on a roof. Now you open this door and you take the elevator to end up in this creepy demonic looking ritual room. There's 5 altars, and if you want to see the Easter egg, you got to find 5 evil red ducks hidden around the city and place them at the altars. That is an ordeal unto itself, and the developers had a lot of fun hiding these things right on the edge of a bunch of like deadly chemical zones. If you get all of them and form the cables up like a pentagram, the secret's revealed. It's a Doom themed challenge room where you go nuts with the only gun in the game. It's modeled after the E1M1 from the original Doom, and there's even that zigzag hallway everyone remembers, and many of the secrets are even exactly the same. I think that it's actually very similar to the Mario room in that it is very faithful to the original level. It's also interesting, in Dying Light 1, they paid tribute to a classic level on consoles. Dying Light 2, classic level on PC. That's not even the only secret room in Dying Light 2, though. There's an entire hidden developer room as well that you can find by connecting cables while falling down the ledges of this tower you can fly into from the VNC building. I know, that is a massive mouthful, but believe me, I just told you the shortest possible version of that. See our video about secrets in Dying Light 2 for the longer version, but the developer room is filled with a ton of in-jokes about Techland's previous games, posters, and even a thank you note to the player. It's just kind of a fun but difficult to get to area. It is certainly worth finding though. And number 9 is Pokemon Legends Arceus, the secret room there. Another very recent game with a secret room we weren't really supposed to find. Some curious players managed to find it. This is a dummied out room in the game that contains a lot of modern looking stuff like a beanbag chair, flat screen TV, and a Pikachu edition Nintendo Switch. It's probably supposed to be where the player starts off before being warped into the past, but for whatever reason, developers just seem to remove it, even though it's a fully detailed room. The fact it looks so finished suggests the room was removed late in development, but for whatever reason, we don't know. It's pretty rare to find a secret room we're not supposed to find, but this Arceus room has no standard entrances or exits, and the only way to access it is by using third-party tools to clip through the walls and find this place. So they definitely didn't want people to find it, is what I'm saying. And number 8 is Halo Infinite's Xbox room / giant sandwich. One of the best things about Halo Infinite is the developers snuck a little bit of that Bungie magic back into the game. There's a little more humor and a ton of weird, goofy Easter eggs to find. Most of them are kind of hidden in plain sight or out around the world, but 2 of them definitely count as secret rooms. The first we're going to talk about is this cave found over by the spire. You go inside, clear the first big arena room, and then grapple up to the top of this pillar in the center of the room. If you look from on top of this thing, you see a tiny little opening that's possible to grapple up into. That's where you find the giant sandwich. I mean, it's a giant sandwich. The next one is found in the northern part of the map, where these hex-like structures, like with the other secret room, if you look in a very specific spot, you can find a tiny crack in the ceiling you can grapple up into. Inside this one is kind of an Xbox gaming room, containing the OG Xbox and a TV with snacks all over the floor. These 2 rooms are basically perfect for this list. They're absolutely secret, and they are very ridiculous. And number 7 is Watch Dogs Legion. I almost totally forgot about this one, actually. There's a really cool secret room to find in the 3rd Watch Dogs game. This is one of those secret rooms where the solution sounds like it doesn't make any sense because the only way to actually get it is to follow the alternate reality game that's found completely outside of the game. So don't ask us why you have to do these random steps to unlock this place. You just do, and that's the best answer we can give. East of the Millennium Bridge, there's this hidden away locked door. Just finding it naturally is something few people do, but to open it, you have to do something really specific. It only opens at 2 a.m., meaning you have to interact with the door right at 2 a.m. or you will miss it out. It's not MGS5. You can't smoke a cigarette and quickly switch to whatever time you want. You just have to sit and wait if you miss it. Inside the place is the secret lair of Default, the hacker you fight in the original Watch Dogs. And if you explore the place, you can actually get his unique mask to wear. So this game actually has one of the best rewards for finding the secret room. The actual interior is uniquely decorated, but nothing totally crazy. Still pretty well buried, and this series doesn't really normally have stuff like this. And number 6 is Demon's Souls on PS5 Secret Door. The original version of the game had a fair share of secrets, but the remaster, Blue Point, snuck in some new stuff. Probably the most infamous is the one we're talking about here. The new locked door you can find in the Boletaria Palace's 3rd area that's impossible to get to unless you collect 26 of a new item called ceramic coins. These coins can't be found in the regular game. Instead, they're hidden away in the new Fractured mode, which mirrors the world of the game and generally makes things a lot tougher. That is not the end of it. You also have to have either a pure white or pure black world tendency for the coins to even start showing up, which is a whole other thing to deal with because there's a lot going on with world tendency in this game. Once you got 26 ceramic coins, you can trade them with Sparky the Crow. You get a rusted key, and that's what actually opens the door. So basically, very few people are getting in here. And inside, you get a set of penetrator armor, so players can finally look like that guy if they want. It was a long required addition to the game, especially after Dark Souls made it so you can get the armor of many of the boss enemies as rewards. So honestly, it's a great addition. The actual requirements to unlock the door are ridiculous, but if you love Demon's Souls, it's probably worth the effort. And number 5 is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order's Yoda Room. For such an IP-driven game, you'd think there wouldn't be much beside a lot of callbacks and references, because it's Star Wars. And yeah, those are there. But there's also a lot of plain weird stuff that the developers snuck in. Probably the weirdest is this oddball origami room that can only be found by going through the Temple of Eorem all the way up to when you roll the ball to the exit, but instead of leaving, you make a tricky jump down to a previously visited area. If you manage to grab the wall and slip through this narrow passage, you find a room containing a bunch of Star Wars papercraft things. They're either really low poly models or they're papercraft. I don't know exactly. The most prominent of these is these big Yodas. I don't know why these are here. Don't know exactly what to make of it. It's in a completely counterintuitive spot, and the rewards you get here are nothing except a bunch of silly looking Star Wars creatures, but it's still pretty great. And number 4 is Death Stranding's Higgs' house. A little secret that's easy to miss in Death Stranding. It's actually possible to visit the hideout of Higgs, the gold masked bad guy you spend a lot of the game contending with. The funny thing about this one is the place isn't all that hard to find, and actually has a series of missions associated with it, but you spend most of the game not even knowing the place is the home of Higgs. If you return here after beating the game, you can actually go inside and explore, and the place is wall-to-wall conspiracy boards and crazy messages, and there's like a memory chip that gives you tons ton of information about what the guy's deal actually is. For players really invested in the story, it is a goldmine because Higgs is a relatively mysterious character for most of the game, and this is the only way to find out a lot about him. So this secret room is in a location that's not normally secret, and there's no reason to return to this place after the game ends, but there is an absurd contradictory explanation that could only be in a Hideo Kojima game. It's not exactly ridiculous inside, but some of these messages in the walls are a little off. At number 3 is the secret egg rooms in Deltarune. Like Undertale before it, Deltarune is a game filled with secrets and mysteries, and of course that means there's a secret room or two hidden in here. Even though the game isn't finished, there's a lot to find in the chapters that are currently available, including some mysterious eggs that can only be found in strange rooms that I really have no idea how anyone was supposed to find. Like this one in Chapter 2, where you go down a secret path and survive getting run over by an annoying dog, and then you end up in this dead-end room with a mysterious message on the wall saying there's a room in between. And if you interpreted that as go back and forth between this room and the other one until you randomly appear in a new room, good for you! Clearly this game was made for people with brains like yours. It wouldn't be so hard to figure out if it only took a few exits, but oh no. You gotta keep going way past the point where it feels like nothing's gonna happen. In this room between, you can find a strange tree and an invisible figure hiding behind it that you can talk to. They give you an egg, which may or may not have some significance. We don't know. Chapter 1 had a similar room with a different egg in it. Whole thing's pretty weird. At this point, we have no idea. This could be an elaborate troll for all we know. But it's intriguing, and it's definitely going to keep us around for the rest of Deltarune. And number 2 is Blasphemous. In the previous list, we mentioned Bloodstained and its secret arcade room. So for this one, let's talk about another relatively popular retro-inspired Metroidvania. Blasphemous is a pretty bizarre and grotesque game. Most of its secrets are a little more lore-related than anything else, but this secret room totally breaks the immersion of the game world and lets you play a Blasphemous arcade game. Compared to all the weird and nasty stuff you find in this game, a regular old arcade cabinet feels out of place, and that only adds to the ridiculousness of this secret. Just getting this thing is a huge challenge. You have to find this secret room in the desecrated cistern that's hidden in the already hard to get room that requires you to have a special item that makes your character unaffected by water. Getting that thing on its own is very obscure, so basically you have to find a secret to find a secret to find a secret. Go into the secret room, you'll find an arcade cabinet called Alcazar of Grief, a play on Castlevania games naming schemes like Symphony of the Night or Aria of Sorrow, blah blah blah. And if you insert some money, you play a lo-fi remake of the game, complete with a chiptune soundtrack. It's a great looking area with a lot of work put into it and absolutely worth hunting down if you're hardcore so you can find it. And finally, at number 1, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, the Dancing Zombies room. There's plenty of secret rooms out there that are ridiculous because of how hard to find they are, but few as ridiculous as this one just because of its straight up silliness. The first zombie map for Black Ops Cold War is called Die Machine. Every zombies map has an Easter egg, a big secret set of objectives a player can complete. They truly want to beat a map, but they usually hide a few extra secrets and side Easter eggs into these maps as well, and this has got to be one of the best. Get transported into this hidden room, you have to run around the big particle accelerator room, shoot out specific lights around the area. Trying to find these things in the heat of battle is next to impossible, so finding this thing pretty much requires a comprehensive guide if you want any chance of actually doing it. So if you manage to hit them all, then you're automatically transported to an alternate reality version of the room with disco lights and, of course, dancing zombies. The centerpiece of this whole ridiculous room are the dancing zombie pallbearers, which is as strange as it sounds. After a while, you're automatically teleported back to the regular map. You're rewarded with a box containing a free juggernog and possibly a wonder weapon, which is a great reward for not really a lot of effort. But if all the room had was just a couple of dancing zombies, I'd consider that okay. The dancing pallbearer zombies, though, that's what makes this as goofy as it is in the best way. As a quick bonus, Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach has a mystery room, a secret room that can only be accessed through the end game of Security Breach. It requires you to have all the upgrades and a camera to get to. You have to take a picture of the blank wall. You do it right, it'll open, reveal a strange secret room where you can listen to the invisible tapes hidden all around the world. It's actually so well hidden that we have to mention it again here, even if it's something we've mentioned in a few other videos already. That's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now is a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable all notifications, and as always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter, Falcon Hero. We'll see you next time right here on Game Rings.
Hunting for Easter eggs is a really fun thing to do to spend more time in a video game world, but sometimes it's a little bit much. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Game Ranks, the 6 hardest Easter eggs of 2021 that seemed impossible. Starting off at number 6, it's Halo Infinite's Gaming Lair and the Big Sandwich. Now, there's actually really a lot of fun Easter eggs in Halo Infinite's campaign. There's a whole lot to see if you're willing to take the time to find them. Some are just kind of out in the open, but at least with these two, they're hidden in incredibly obscure little spots that are basically impossible to find without a guide. The first one you can find is this Big Sandwich, which is hidden away in a cave south of the spire. There's a random pillar you can grapple up to, and if you look up, you'll notice this tiny space between the rocks that you can just barely fit through. Grapple again, and there you go, you're in the giant sandwich room. Why is it here? I have no idea. It's just a really weird Easter egg, but it's pretty detailed at least. Honestly, it's just funny to see a giant sandwich. The second secret room you can find appears in Region 4 in this hexagonal metal tunnel in the southeast. There's an incredibly small gap between the rocky ceiling and the metal walls. Yep, you guessed it. Grapple up there, you'll find this hidden room containing a flat screen TV, some folding chairs, and an original Xbox. It's a throwback Easter egg in more ways than one. Remember when games used to hide Xboxes in them all the time? Maybe I'm just thinking of Ninja Gaiden. Either way, it's a pretty funny little secret that's crazy hard to find. At number 5 is Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach, the secret room, and the VIP escape end. It is not a surprise that a game like Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach would have some pretty crazy Easter eggs. I mean, the whole series is Easter egg crazy, and pretty much every previous entry in the franchise has at least 1 or 2 big secrets in it. And yeah, this game has it all. Secret endings, secret rooms, ciphers written on walls, mysterious messages. I mean, it's all here, and it's pretty tough to find. We were split on which secret to include here because they're all pretty difficult to find in their own way, but the hidden 5th ending and the secret record room are weird enough that we feel they both deserve a mention. The secret room is probably the more well-known one at this point, but it's possible to find this strange room hidden behind a false wall all the way back at the beginning of the game. It requires multiple upgrades to actually access, like you need the voice box upgrade and the claw upgrade to open the gates, clearing the way to this place, as well as the phase camera to actually access the secret. But if you've got all that, then you can backtrack through the supply tunnels back to where you first encountered Monty at the beginning of the game. Pass through the smoke, go through the 2 gates, find a dead end with a strange note that gives you a clue for what to do there, take out the phase camera, take a picture of the empty wall. If you do it correctly, a door will appear leading to a creepy room that's a big reference to the previous game in the series called Sister Location. The main reason to check this room out is you can listen to these secret retro discs here. You can only see them if you use the ocular upgrade, so you pretty much have to do everything in this game if you want to find all the secrets in this spot. Now beyond that, there's a standard secret ending in the game that involves delving into a mysterious sinkhole, but that's actually a more obvious ending than the one we're talking about here. The VIP ending is more of a joke because it's a callback to when you try to escape through the VIP lounge near the start of the game. Freddy explains that the emergency exit can only be accessed by VIPs, which he admits is not a very good system. You'd think that things would end there, but it's actually possible to get VIP access. All you have to do is get most of the collectibles in the game. From what we can tell, you need to open about 60 prize boxes, which are found around the complex, along with 6 golden plush dolls. If you get them all, which is more time consuming than anything if you've got the ocular upgrade at least, then it's actually possible to escape using the emergency exit. And number 4 is Metroid Dread's early bomb against Kraid. It's definitely a smaller thing than some of the previous entries, but how you go about seeing this is what makes it so interesting. In Metroid Dread, it's possible to see a special animation when fighting Kraid by doing some classic Metroid-style sequence breaking. The whole trick here is that you need to go into the Kraid boss with the Morphball bombs, which you actually acquire normally a little bit after you fight Kraid. The key to pulling off this sequence break is you've got to be able to survive going through this superheated area. Normally this spot would kill you before you're able to get anywhere, at least at this point in the game, but with some clever planning, it's actually possible to get through the area. What you have to do is make sure that you have 3 energy parts before going into the hot zone. Now normally that wouldn't be very helpful, but halfway through this superheated area you can find an energy part, and if you manage to get 4, then you'll earn another energy tank, which just so happens to also max up your health. From there, you sneak through another Emmy area to get the bomb upgrade, but at this point, the hard part's over. Now you just continue along the critical path until you face off against Kraid, and when you get to the second stage of the fight, just roll up into a ball, use the morph ball launcher, and shoot yourself into one of Kraid's nasty spike shooting orifices. It's pretty gross, but it's an effective way to quickly take this dude down. Pulling off some of these sequence-breaking tricks sometimes feels like you're cheating the game, and therefore doing something the developers don't want you to do. But with this game, the fact that you can take out the boss in a special way that's only possible if you sequence break means they clearly intentionally made it so you could get certain items like the morph ball bomb early, and that is awesome. And number 3 is Deltarune Chapter 2's Secret Egg. Toby Fox, the creator of Undertale and Deltarune, really loves his secrets. Undertale in particular was jam-packed with weird stuff to find and alternate routes to pursue, but with Deltarune it seemed like he wanted to create a more focused narrative that didn't have quite so many branching paths. That doesn't mean he didn't hide a few secrets in it, though. There are secret bosses, literal Easter eggs to find, and an entire alternate route to uncover in Chapter 2. That alternate route, similar to the genocide route from the original Undertale, is absolutely nuts on its own, but it's so elaborate that it's hard to describe as an Easter egg, especially when, as we said earlier, there are actual honest-to-God eggs that are hidden in this game. There was one in Chapter 1 of Deltarune, and big surprise, there's another one in this game. To find it, you have to enter Cyber City and get to a point in the game where you're journeying. Well, there's an area where you have to hit these buttons and control the stoplights. Instead of going forward like you're supposed to, instead hit 9 and 5 stoplights and then run straight down and to the right, then down again, then to the left. All of that leads to what seems like a dead end. There's a dumpster and some graffiti on the wall that gives you a very cryptic hint. The room between, there is a room between. For most people, that might as well be meaningless. But if you've already found the Easter egg in the first game, then you know what to do. If you enter and exit this room over and over again, eventually you'll enter an entirely new room. Again, it seems like there's not really anything to do here, but there's actually an invisible figure standing behind the tree that you can talk to. Now, just say yes when you talk to them, and you get an egg as a key item. There are a few things that you can do with the egg back in the light world, but for now the actual purpose of these eggs are a mystery. The series has a massive fan base, so any mystery the game throws out is going to be solved eventually, which is good because there's no way I'd be able to figure out how to find this egg on my own. And number 2 is Psychonauts 2. You just have to see it. Truly a bizarre one that I have no idea how anyone originally found. In Psychonauts 2, if you return to the level Hollis's Hot Streak, the casino one, after you beat the game, then you can find an incredibly weird little animation hidden in the game world. How you unlock this whole thing sounds completely random, but stick with me. You need to travel to the maternity ward area, then pull yourself to the area on top of the entrance. From there, you have to grab a pen with your psychic powers and then shoot at the sign that says ward under the big roulette wheel. If you do all that, then this little animation plays which depicts, and I cannot believe I am saying this, but a pregnant Raz being gurneyed into an emergency room. There's dialogue too, so if you ever wanted to hear lines like, Lobato's consciousness is about to erupt out of your psychic uterus, well, this is for you. It's probably one of the weirdest Easter eggs of all time, and the only reason it's not higher in this list is because of how relatively easy it is to find compared to the absolute madness of the next entry. The only clue to explain any of this is what you do here. Like, you use a pen on a ward sign. This crazy animation thing was most likely created by Penn Ward, the guy who created stuff like Adventure Time, and that's further reinforced by his name appearing in the credits. Why he did this and for what reason, we have no idea, but it's certainly something. And finally, at number 1 is Inscription's truly bonkers secret alternate reality game. Inscription is a game about secrets, and just progressing through it normally is kind of like solving an alternate reality game in some ways. There's an element of danger and mystery to everything you do in the game, and it just has a totally unique atmosphere that's both creepy and paranoid. They keep piling on more and more secrets, and every time you peel back a layer of what's going on, you find more strangeness underneath. But that's only the topmost layer of mystery mystery in the game. When you get to the actual Easter egg ARG elements, that's when things get really crazy. Because very rarely have we seen an ARG that just feels like an extension of the game itself, and that's pretty much what happens here. Inscription slowly gets more and more meta as the game goes along, and after a while they just start straight up dropping secrets on you. Like if you manage to fight the mycologist in Act 3, which is only found by clicking on a hidden arrow in a certain location, then when you defeat him, you get a cipher key. There's a different section of the game where some secret codes appear if you play the game in letterbox mode instead of standard. These are the kinds of secrets we're talking about here, folks. And we're only just getting started. If you want to decipher some of the secret messages in the game, you have to do obscure stuff like modify your save file to add in story events. Another part of the puzzle requires you to play an incredibly specific sequence of cards in Act 1. Solving all this stuff eventually gave people an address to a fake website called Data Storage Manufacturing, and 3 people who put in the correct address on the site got a literal floppy disk in the mail that each contained a clue to the final secret. So basically, solving this whole thing would be utterly impossible without an entire community of people trying to figure it out. Probably the people most responsible for putting this all together are the users of the Daniel Mullins Discord server. Like, they're the ones responsible for creating the Google document I'm pulling this information off of. I mean, just look at this information. It's like 60 pages of stuff. The secrets in this game are really next level because unlike most alternate reality games, this one's directly tied into the game rather than being some outside thing that just exists to build up hype. We've got nothing but respect for the people who managed to piece all this stuff together because the whole thing's about as close to impossible as an Easter egg can get. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, so click subscribe and don't forget to enable all notifications. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on Game Race. Some Easter eggs in video games are ones we can't get out of our minds. Sometimes for maybe a little bit more risque, immature, or otherwise kinda crude reasons. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Game Ranks, 10 naughty Easter eggs we can't unsee. Starting off with number 10, Assassin's Creed 3 has a moment where Benjamin Franklin offers some advice. Assassin's Creed 3 is a game set during the American War of Independence, and like many other games in the series, it tries to take a look at some of the lesser-known parts of well-known history, for better or worse. One thing that may be somewhat shocking to people is how the game chooses to depict Benjamin Franklin. You know, the old guy with the little glasses, sometimes referred to as the founding grandfather, the guy with the kite who discovered electricity. You know, not really. We're used to seeing him as a sort of intellectual and witty type, but the game shows a slightly lesser known side to the character. At the start of the game, you can talk to him in his store. He'll go off on a pretty off-color rant about taking older women as your mistress.
Older women cannot conceive, which means one less thing over which to fret. In fact, you also decrease the chance of acquiring something like the French pox, its presence clearly visible, or the woman dead.
I'm sure a lot of players got to this part and were like, what on earth is he talking about? Because seriously, it's a little gross. But here's the thing, it's almost verbatim taken from something the actual real man himself wrote. A letter called Advice to a Friend on Choosing a Mistress, which was written in 1745, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Franklin actually wrote a lot of stuff like this. It's satirical, it's at least partially meant to be funny, but it's still kind of shocking if you don't know about it. This is a man who wrote an essay called, and I'm totally serious here, Fart Proudly. Yeah, this is less wish we could unsee and more wish we could hear more. The guy said you should say, wish we could unhear, but I don't. This stuff is hilarious.
You mad bastard.
At number 9, it's the Naughty Gnomes from GTA 5. Grand Theft Auto 5 is a game that has no shortage of risque or even nasty stuff in it, and that goes for its Easter eggs as well. There are an absolute ton of them.
Hell, we did a whole video about it, but here's one that didn't get mentioned. In the Vinewood Hills, there's a house with some garden gnomes in front of it. You might not even notice them the first time you pass by the area, but if you stop and look, well, one of them has their pants down. Yeah, for some reason, the developers at Rockstar included a gnome exposing its butt in the game. Is it mooning you? Is it supposed to be some kind of sex thing? I don't know, but it is bizarre and a little bit uncomfortable. If you're one of those people who just find garden gnomes a little creepy, well, this is not going to change that. Like we said, there's a boatload of adult humor in GTA 5 and GTA series in general, but this is definitely one that we kind of wish we could unsee. At number 8, you can catch a guy taking a dump in Red Dead Redemption 2. Oh yeah, we're just saying it like that. Taking a dump. Naughty Easter eggs come in all forms, and here is an example of the more scatological variety. Yeah, I didn't mean to say it like that. The reason this is funny is because it's repulsive. During one of the earlier missions of the game called Polite Society, Valentine style, you know, the one where you take the camp ladies to Valentine along with Uncle. When you go into the hotel to search for Karen Jones, you don't have to go directly to the room she's in. Instead, if you bust into one of the other rooms, you find this guy named Harville Presley, and he's squatting on the chamber pot.
Oh, get the hell out of here, will you?
Sorry, wrong room.
It is a disgusting reminder of what people had to put up with before the widespread use of indoor plumbing, and it is rendered in the usual level of Rockstar detail, so a lot. Very detailed. Too detailed. One of the weirdest things about this guy, who you might see for all of 2 seconds, is that he's got a lot of details about him. He's got a name, he's mentioned in the newspaper, which even says he's suffering from a bowel disease after eating a church potluck supper. So the whole thing is both gross and like weirdly detailed, so pretty much par for the course with Rockstar. And number 7 is a urinal conversation from Deadpool. The Deadpool game is wild, to say the very least. It is filled with goofy humor, fourth wall breaking jokes, of course, and, as you might have expected, some pretty rude stuff. Even though this game actually came out before the movie, it definitely seems like the movie might have drawn some inspiration from it. In one of the more bizarre sequences in a game, which is frankly full of them, it's possible to stop at this urinal where 2 guards are taking a leak. It's just on this random wall for some reason, and if you interact with it, Deadpool will use the empty stall between them.
Dicks hang out here often? Get it? The dicks.
Dude, seriously?
The pee-pee song. I'm gonna sing the pee-pee song. Nice dick.
One of the funnier bits in this is the fact that you have to choose to leave the urinal, so you can just keep peeing for a really unnatural amount of time, with Deadpool making increasingly bizarre comments about how long he's peeing and how awkward the situation is. At the end, of course, he just kills the 2 guys. I mean, it's Deadpool, what did you expect? It's a goofy non sequitur in a game that is absolutely filled with them.
Haven't trained the old lizard since level 1.
Dude, don't talk while I pee, all right?
Number 6 is the lusty Argonian maid from the Elder Scrolls series. This is an absolute classic. Most of the books in the Elder Scrolls games are stuffy tomes filled with the histories of the various fantasy realms, treatises on gods, stories of great heroes, and magical wonders, all of the stuff you'd expect in a fantasy game. But once in a while, you'll find one of these books. The Lusty Argonian Maid. You know, the weird lizard-looking race, Argonians. These things are intentionally embarrassing, filled with single entendres and, like, painfully corny puns. Like, they're so intentionally goofy that they gained a lot of notoriety. By the time Skyrim came out, these books basically an essential part of the Elder Scrolls series. Like, people wouldn't accept a new game without a few of these volumes of ridiculous books. The first appearance was in Morrowind, actually. You could steal one from a dude in Vivek City. Oblivion and Skyrim added a lot more volumes after that, each one found in a very specific location in the world. It's basically just the writers having some fun by putting something really goofy in. And considering all the serious books you normally find, it does break up the tone. But if you ever tried reading some of these things, there's definitely some parts you wish you could unsee. At number 5 is an unfortunate end from Fallout 3. At the Citadel ruins of Fallout 3, there's a skeleton with a fan in its crotch. Like skeletons in Fallout games, you could do a whole video on just that. Top Fallout skeletons. There are so many skeletons just dotting the maps of the various Fallout games, with a ton of them placed in embarrassing, goofy, or even kind of nasty poses. For Fallout 3's Broken Steel DLC, we got a skeleton that's got all three of those. At the end of the game, we're given the option to either destroy the Enclave platform at Adams Air Force Base or the Citadel. Choose the Citadel. It is the evil option, but it's the only way to find this particularly unique skeleton. After clearing out all the Brotherhood of Steel, you know, the folks you betrayed by destroying their base, you can go to the ruins and scavenge a lot of interesting things. And if you check this small room, you might find this guy. It's a skeleton with a fan in its crotch. I do not know why it is there. Like, is that just what this dude was into? Or maybe by some accident the fan fell in his junk during the final moments of his life? There's no way to really know. Frankly, it is goofy as hell. It's absolutely bizarre, and it's something most people probably will not unsee, considering how the entire game has you fighting the Enclave, so it'd be pretty random to just decide at the last minute to blow up your allies instead. But if you do it, this is your reward. Skeleton with a fan on its crotch. Totally worth it. At number 4 is the dance party in The Evil Within. In the DLC for The Evil Within called The Consequence, you play as Julie Kidman dealing with her own story that's running adjacent to the story of the main game. In Chapter 3, which is actually the first chapter of this DLC because it's a continuation of the Assignment DLC, there's a random vending machine you can interact with. If you interact with it 15 times, then a picture hanging on the other side of the room will fall down, revealing a peephole that you can look through. Behind it is, well, a dance party. It's got your standard enemies flailing around like crazy with light sticks. It's got one of the main enemies of the DLC, the Shade, dancing on a raised platform. And this thing's one of the creepiest creatures in the entire series. It's a pair of legs in high heels attached to what looks like a spotlight with bloody rags hanging off it. It's grotesque, it's bizarre, and it's got a very unpleasant psychosexual thing going on with it. And in this Easter egg, you see it dancing. It's bizarre, and we don't want to see this thing strutting its stuff on the dance floor, let me tell you. It's just one image we are all better off not seeing. At number 3 is Baldur Flips the Bird from God of War, the 2018 one. It's a hilarious one that nobody would even know about without some clever modders making it possible. During the opening throwdown with Baldur, in the PS4 God of War game, after Kratos snaps his neck, seemingly killing him, Baldur falls into the canyon beside them and flips off Kratos as he falls. The thing is, this is impossible to see in the game normally. Even when trying to use the camera mode feature, it's not possible because it happens during a cutscene. The only way you see this little additional joke animation is a mod, which puts free camera into the game. This one's entirely on this one guy named Lance McDonald. He has a YouTube page dedicated to going out of bounds and exploring secrets in various games, and he was the only one to find this one. It's definitely naughty, and you won't see it in the opening scene of God of War, but on the same token, it makes it so you can't see it the same way ever again, because you know this is happening behind your back. At number 2, Mr. and Mrs. Hanky make a cameo in South Park: The Fractured But Whole. It's a South Park game, so of course it's filled with disgusting stuff, duh. But maybe one of the nastiest secrets is finding Mr. and Mrs. Hanky in the second South Park game. The whole game's naughty as hell because it's South Park, that's what it's about. Like, if you've watched South Park for any number of years, it doesn't even seem naughty to you, but show it to somebody who goes to church every Sunday, they might have a different opinion. To find Mr. and Mrs. Hanky, literal sentient poop, you have to travel to certain bathrooms after getting the Sandblaster power, which is, yes, a fart. This is a game where you have fart-based powers because, of course, you use the power on a clogged pipe and it reveals one of the hankies.
How? Boy, you sure cleared that giant turd.
Along with a whole mess of fecal matter. It's juvenile, it's disgusting, and it's South Park. And finally, at number 1, it's the robot lap dance from Cyberpunk 2077. This is a definite wish you could unsee one. Many cyborgs in this game are almost entirely robotic, so with a name like Robot Lap Dance, you might think you'd see something more appealing, but no, just forget about that for now. To find this thing, you need to travel to the place called the Dewdrop Inn and bust through some random door. Inside, you will see 2 military robots engaging in some private time. Yes, it's got one of these bulky robots doing a sexy dance, and it is actually pretty creepy. Imagine just wandering into this scene. It'd be like just randomly running into that bear BJ scene from The Shining. It's creepy. Well, maybe not that bad, but it is something I would rather not see. And Cyberpunk is really a game filled with risque stuff, so sometimes you are going to come up with something that's maybe a little too weird. This is one of those things. But what did you think? Leave us a comment, let us know. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. The best way to see them first is, of course, the subscription. So click subscribe. Don't forget to enable all notifications. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on Game Ranks. Obviously, developers have tons of ideas, and that's how they make video games. But sometimes, it's the fans that come up with some good stuff. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Game Ranks, 10 fan ideas that were added to video games. Starting off with number 10, it's BioShock Infinite's Old Man Winter. In Barrel at Sea, the DLC for BioShock Infinite, you can get a plasmid called Old Man Winter, which basically works the same as the ice power from the original BioShock. What you might not know is that this plasmid is actually a fan creation for the most part. See, in the BioShock Infinite art book, there was an unused Vigor design that showed a bottle with an old man design on it. One fan who was inspired by it designed an entire poster around the thing and came up with a name for it, Old Man Winter. The poster blew up immediately in the BioShock fandom because of its accuracy to the games, and even got some approving comments from the series creator, Ken Levine. Eventually, the creator of the piece, Joe Trinder, was contacted by the developers, who actually bought his design and incorporated it into the game. The poster you find for Old Man Winter in the game is almost identical to the one that he originally designed. It's just that they swapped out the BioShock Infinite stuff for some original BioShock stuff, as the DLC takes place in Rapture from the original game. This is one of those rare examples where developers didn't just take a fan's idea, they actually bought it outright and put the artwork directly into the game, which is a pretty cool thing to do. At number 9 in Mortal Kombat, there were secret combatants and hungry trees. Now, when it comes to fan feedback, few long-running series have done it as well as Mortal Kombat. Ever since the beginning, the creators of this series have been masters of incorporating fan ideas into their games. So many characters over the years began as rumors or fan theories, and they were incorporated. Guys like Ermac, Blaze, and Rain all primarily began as rumors before actually becoming characters. Maybe the most significant of all these characters is Scarlet, who was totally a fan-invented character. In an interview with the PlayStation blog, Ed Boon said this about Scarlet. She was a completely rumored character. She never existed and was born out of the rumor. It got such legs that a name actually came out of it. There was never a glitch that turned Katana red. That just never existed. That was just an urban legend like Animalities and Ermac, a rumor that we eventually decided to make true. Scarlet has now actually appeared in 2 major games.
to target something first. lost that yet. That ability isn't ready yet. Not ready yet. I can't do that yet.
Mortal Kombat 9 as a DLC character, and Mortal Kombat 11 as a main roster addition. Another big fan idea was the existence of a stage fatality in the Living Forest level for Mortal Kombat 2. It was a really popular theory that of course was not actually in the game. The trees eating people actually first appeared in Shaolin Monks, a beat-em-up from the 6th generation of consoles. There is way more that we can get in here, but the MK series loves to add fan stuff to their games. At number 8 is the Doom 2016/Brutal Doom connection. The newest Doom games, and we're talking about Doom 2016 and Eternal here, they've definitely taken some inspiration for the very massive and very active modding community from the original Doom games. The exact amount is hard to say because there aren't any developer interviews out there exactly where they took inspiration from, but it's easy to look at popular mods like Brutal Doom and think, oh, well that must have inspired the way the new Doom games are played. At least a little bit. One thing we can actually say is that the glory kills in Doom 2016 probably actually weren't inspired by Brutal Doom, which did have a similar mechanic. There is actually gameplay footage from early builds of Doom 4, which would eventually become Doom 2016, and they show glory kills being in the same game around 2008. Brutal Doom's first build didn't release till 2010, so it seems like these first-person kill animations were already in the game before the developers even heard of Brutal Doom. Other stuff, like the weapon modding system, is very similar to another mod called Project Brutality. Basically, the whole feel of the new Doom games feels similar to what modders were going for with Brutal Doom. It's Doom, but faster and more violent, just all around more aggressive. Even though there doesn't seem to be much that was directly inspired by these mods, they do feel similar. One thing that definitely was taken from the fans, though, is that they actually called the Doom Slayer Doom Guy in Doom Eternal. For whatever reason, this has just been the most common name for the guy you play as in Doom for decades now, so it's pretty funny to see Doom Guy acknowledged in the main series. At number 7 is the Left 4 Dead 2 Last Stand update. This update to Left 4 Dead 2 is unique and it's entirely fan-made. It is an official update, however, fully endorsed by Valve, but the actual content and updates fully provided by the fan community. The biggest thing is it adds a short campaign called, obviously, The Last Stand, but it introduces new stuff like melee weapons, makes a whole lot of quality life improvements that fans of the game have been requesting for years. Like, keep in mind, this update came out in 2020, and Left 4 Dead 2 came out in 2009, so it has been a while. And this isn't even the first community update to hit the game. In 2012, they released some DLC called Cold Steam, which was actually an entirely community-made campaign that surprisingly wasn't free. It actually cost 560 Microsoft points. These are just two examples of Valve incorporating fan support into their games. Team Fortress 2 is also filled with this. A huge part of the game is fan-made and fan-supported. One of the reasons Valve's games became as popular as they did was because of mod support, so it makes sense that Valve added some of these fan ideas into their games. At number 6 is suit-only Silent Assassin from the Hitman series. In the original Hitman games, those who got bored of the normal gameplay eventually started completing the missions in the default suit, with Silent Assassin suit-only being often the hardest way to complete a level. Hitman Absolution made completing a mission without changing the default outfit a challenge in most missions. Not only did the suit-only challenge return to Hitman 2016, developers also made Silent Assassin suit-only a challenge. Basically, it completely changes how you play the game. Using disguises and hiding in plain sight is a huge part of the series, and suit only basically turns Hitman into a Metal Gear style stealth game. In the earlier Hitman games, you would get scored on your performance at the end of every mission, with the top rank being Silent Assassin. Some players, looking to challenge themselves further, decided to try to get every mission in the suit you start in every level while still getting Silent Assassin, which obviously is incredibly difficult, particularly in the old games. It became such a common fan practice that Hitman developers, IO Interactive, added it as a challenge to their games. Starting with Hitman Absolution, many levels had side objectives called challenges you could do to get a higher score. Many levels had the challenge of suit only. It wasn't until Hitman 2016 that they finally went all in on Silent Assassin suit only and made it a challenge on each mission, actually making it possible to do it without having to totally exploit the enemy AI or use weird tricks. At number 5, Portal showing up in a LEGO game. Here's one we're not entirely sure about, but there has to be some kind of connection here, right? Just follow along with us here and let us know what you think. One of the weirdest additions to that LEGO Toys to Life game, LEGO Dimensions, was Portal. Yep, the Valve first-person puzzle game. It was one of the first few things introduced that didn't actually have some LEGO product already, so why did they include it? Well, there's a pretty popular Portal 2 fan animation floating around before LEGO Dimensions came out, which was made entirely of custom parts. And we have to imagine that the popularity of these at least partially inspired the developers of LEGO Dimensions to bring Portal into their LEGO game. And the Portal stuff is actually pretty cool. They brought back most of the voice cast from the Portal games and everything. Like, they even got Stephen Merchant back as Wheatley. So, yeah, nothing concrete out there saying these fan animations are what got Portal into their game, but it's such a strange thing to put in otherwise that it feels like it has to be at least part of the reason. At number 4, when mods were integrated into the Bethesda Fallout games. The new Bethesda created Fallout games to incorporate a lot of fan ideas. Outside of Valve, Bethesda's probably the biggest studio to benefit from fan creators, so it's basically what's kept the Elder Scrolls series going for as long as it has. Some of the more obvious fan ideas are stuff like the weapon modification system in Fallout New Vegas, which is, considering how the modification menu feels like a mod at times, it makes a lot of sense. One really popular utility mod for the Elder Scrolls Oblivion was the keychain, which made it so all your keys would go into a single slot of your inventory so it wouldn't be cluttered with keys that you couldn't throw away. Fallout 3 incorporated this mod in the game with its own keychain item, which functioned pretty much in the same way. Other stuff like the Scorched Sierra Power Armor was originally a mod before added to the game officially with DLC. Another popular fan thing to do had to do with the ink blot test that you have to take at the beginning of Fallout New Vegas. Many players thought that one of them looked like two bears high-fiving and thought that the game should let you choose that as an option. As a joke, developers put a character named Two Bears High-Fiving into the Honest Hearts DLC. There are so many more examples of this kind of thing happening in Bethesda games, but we're gonna stop here for now, otherwise we would be here all day. At number 3 is the 1.6 update for Minecraft. Like, Minecraft is another game that's seen a ton of fan interaction. In its early days, it was almost a collaborative project before it was bought out by Microsoft in 2014, but even today we see a lot of fan-created content for the game that is officially supported by the developers. One major update the game saw with the 1.6 update was adding horses to the game. This was created in collaboration with the popular Minecraft modder, Dr. Zark, who had made the very popular Mo Creatures mod for the game. Yeah, you can tell that this one is old if adding a rideable horse is considered a big deal, but at the time, Minecraft was still kind of finding its niche, and it was doing that by working with a lot of talented fans of the game. There are many, many more examples of this, but this is one of the first times that a modder worked directly with the developers to add something from their mods into the actual game. At number 2 is the secret cow level in Diablo 2. This is probably one of the most famous urban legends out there, the secret cow level. Certain players of the original Diablo got obsessed with clicking on this cow in the town of Tristram, which sometimes would give you a funny response after clicking it a few times. For some reason, rumors started spreading that it was possible to unlock a secret level involving this cow, either by just clicking on it a whole lot or by doing some near impossible sequence of action. Of course, we now know that there was no secret cow level in Diablo 1 because Blizzard just decided to make it real in Diablo 2. To get there, you have to combine Word Slag, which is a fairly useless item you can get in the ruins of Tristram, with the Scroll of Town Portal, and you can only use it in a world you've already beaten. Before adding this, Blizzard swore up and down that there is no cow level, so much that it became kind of a catchphrase. Like, this is one of those fan ideas that just came out of nowhere, but the developers latched onto it and made it one of the most famous examples of something fan-made appearing in an official game. And finally, Shenlong from Street Fighter. Street Fighter, as it is today, has been hugely influenced by its fans. The way the game plays, the characters in it, and the backstories of many of them came about because of fan contributions and ideas. Maybe the most famous fan-created character in a fighting game is Shenlong, who was originally rumored to be a secret character in Street Fighter 2 after a mistranslation of one of Dio's win quotes saying you must defeat Shenlong to stand a chance. There was no Shenlong, just a weird translation of, sure you can move. But most people didn't know that. An Electronic Gaming Monthly article only further stoked fans of speculation by saying you could unlock Shenlong through some convoluted trick. It was an April Fool's joke, but people still believed it. The whole thing got so big that it eventually ended up influencing Capcom's creation of Akuma and Goken. No one at Capcom has come out and directly said it, but the addition of the secret boss Akuma to Street Fighter II Turbo seems like it was made in response to these rumors of a possible secret character. Goken, on the other hand, is a much more direct Shenlong reference. In an interview to the same magazine that put out the Shenlong rumor, the director of Street Fighter IV, Yoshinori Ono, said this: "Let's just say that jokes from your magazine reported in the past might find their way into the game as fan service." Basically coming out and saying that the secret character in Street Fighter IV was directly inspired by the whole Shenlong thing. There is so much more to Street Fighter that can be considered a fan idea. Hell, the very concept of a combo is basically a fan idea. But there's no denying that, at least for fighting games, the whole Shenlong thing, it was one of the most persistent and influential fan creations out there. But what do you think? Leave us a comment, let us know. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. The best way to see them first is, of course, the subscription. So click subscribe. Don't forget to enable all notifications. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconHero. See you next time, right here on Game Rings. The world of gaming is weird. Every month, Game Ranks puts together the weirdest stuff that's happened because we love to gawk. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Game Ranks, the weird gaming stories of April 2020. Starting off with number 10, police found a Nintendo Switch in the park, and you might think the first instinct was, oh, how did we find the owner? And when you think, oh, well, that wasn't their first instinct, you probably think, did the police steal the Nintendo Switch? Well, they did neither of those things immediately. And I don't think this qualifies as stealing at all, unless you talk about, like, stealing the show. What they did, you see, is they beat all the high scores in all of the games, and then found the owner of the Nintendo Switch and gave it back to them. Now, this was in Bountiful, Utah, which is, I mean, good on the police department there for not taking the Nintendo Switch and just enjoying it forever. Beating all your high scores before they return the Switch, the $300 thing you left in the park. That's a bit much, guys. Come on. Leave the Switch owner with some kind of dignity. It's just brutal, guys. At number 9, the director of Days Gone, in a very, I don't know, I'm gonna call this like not savvy to the culture of video gaming answer to a question. He decided that he was going to blame cheap gamers for if Days Gone doesn't get a sequel, which, by the way, is up in the air. It's not something that we know is going to happen or isn't. He doesn't actually have any effect on whether or not it gets a sequel either. He left the studio, so So anyways, he said this specifically: "I do have an opinion on something your audience may find of interest, and it might piss some of you off. If you love a game, buy it at effing full price. I can't tell you how many times I've seen gamers say, yeah, I got that on sale, I got it through PS Plus, whatever." He basically acted as though this is the reason why the game won't get a sequel if it doesn't. That the game didn't make enough money, which, I mean, given that it was published by Sony Interactive Entertainment and that Bend Studio, the developer, is actually owned by Sony Computer Entertainment, keeping in mind it was a PS exclusive developed by a company Sony owned, that's not the reason it's not going to not get a sequel. To be frank, first-party titles are always going to be for pushing the Sony brand, and that's why PS Plus exists. So I'm sorry, you're wrong. Do they like making money? Sure, but those types of games are kind of an investment in their own platforms. And like just basically blatantly taking a dump on people for not spending more money for a game when like people don't have like infinite money. Like, I'm sorry, we don't all have director salaries, you know? But whatever. At number 8, Brazil might actually start fining developers and publishers $700,000 for including loot box mechanics in their games. Now, the objective is to completely ban loot boxes from the country of Brazil, which, good on Brazil. I gotta say that. Another thing that came out in April was some more studies that linked loot boxes to problem gambling. showing that somewhere in the neighborhood of 5% of gamers generate just above half of the revenue from loot boxes, which is insane. A number of studies established unambiguous links between problem gambling and loot box mechanics. So honestly, like, more countries I think should probably be following suit on what Brazil is doing here, but they are also just at the beginning stages of this. It's an inquiry stage currently, so I mean, they haven't like been able to ban or fine anybody for including loot boxes. But this, I kind of think, highlights exactly how insane it is that for a couple of years, like, the gaming industry was just granted carte blanche to make as much money as they want, getting kids to gamble, more or less. Those same studies I mentioned a minute ago showed that over 40% of kids playing video games were opening loot boxes, which, again, just to remind you, is gambling. It costs money. It's a gambling mechanic that you can't actually win because the things that you win are intangible and unexchangeable for anything in the real world. Just the whole thing sucks. Just end that practice entirely. At number 7, I don't know how to really describe this one. This one is a really good April Fool's joke. Like, it's this fake test of fake new Nvidia cards that just gradually gets more and more absurd. Like, they've got this what seems like absurd Nvidia card. You're like, that's not real. Is that real? That can't be real. And he turns it on. It's obviously fake because you've got a friggin' like Coke can sitting on the table shaking, and it's ridiculous. It looks like something out of Airplane way back in the 1970s. And then after like stuff goes wrong, the guy turns to another card, which is like 4 times the size. It's got like, I don't even know how many fans on it. It looks absolutely ridiculous. He turns it on and it causes like the electricity to blink and all of the electronics in the room to start smoking. He starts coughing. And what's annoying is that there are people who watch this video and like posted comments that say, fake. Like, duh, it's fake. Of course it's fake. They posted it on April 1st. It's silly. It's absurd. It's just a funny thing that somebody did. You don't need to debunk it. At number 6, the GameStop CEO, George Sherman. He's walking away from GameStop this summer with a $175 million payout, which is, by the way, much higher than the amount of money somebody gets leaving an even much larger company than GameStop. And you could probably guess why. It's because the meme stock thing that happened, the huge rally that made GameStop worth way more than it was a couple like years ago. I mean, they've really had problems over the last few years, and now they don't, thanks to memes. I mean, it's obviously more complex than that. But. So what happened is, before COVID, they decoupled George Sherman's pay from the company's performance because they obviously knew that the performance was going to take a hit. I guess to be fair to the guy who's clearly going to take more money than everybody else in the company, whatever. But I get it. I understand the idea behind it. So they gave him some stock instead, and you know what happened with the stock. So now he's sitting on an absolute stock. And he has more money than all of you watching and myself will ever see in our lives combined. Memes! At number 5, a guy playing as a hobbit in the Lord of the Rings Online, a 14-year strong online MMO, decided he was going to reach max level without killing anybody. And he's been doing this for a long time. The name of the player is Cooking with Sim, who has either been cooking batches of 15,000 pies at a time, or has been out collecting the ingredients necessary for pies. He's baked so many pies at this point, so many pies. But for all of you who thought that was not possible, well, it is. It's entirely possible. I actually hadn't even thought of it at all. Like, I think most players probably don't go, is there some way I can bake pies to reach max level? I think that's just not something that enters most people's brains. But congratulations to Cooking with Sim for not only having the idea, but delivering a lot of pies. At number 4, a thesis that came out of Boston University claimed that Mario Kart can teach us how to reduce world poverty and improve sustainability. I think the paper itself is the weird news. I don't want to argue against it or anything because I think anybody actually trying to think about how to reduce poverty is more or less good. I think that is a good thing to do. But it argues that a competitive kart racing game especially the parts that make it addictive, can serve as like a blueprint for economic and social programs that would supposedly help create equity and beat poverty. And as much as I want to say, like, yeah, hell yeah, man, they used a game to figure this stuff out. That's silly. It's weird that you would think, yeah, this game's got all the secrets to making the world less poverty-oriented, when, again, it's a competitive racing game. Competitive being the key word here. One side has to win and one side has to lose. I wouldn't use Mario Kart on basis for removing world poverty is what I'm saying. Nothing against this guy. Again, heart's in the right place, but not sure you got it. At number 3, a streamer by the name of Carney Jarrett, who is, by the way, a phenomenal Guitar Hero player. 100%ed a track that was created in 2011 as a impossible to complete Guitar Hero song. The track was created literally as a joke. You were not supposed to be able to beat it. It was not supposed to be something anybody was ever going to do this with. When he completes this thing, he can't even believe it himself. He just has absolutely no idea how he did it. And, I mean, if you watch the video, I don't know how he did it either. It's insane. What is going on? The fact that he could intentionally do any of that, when in all actuality, it just seems like random crap going on. I can't even mentally comprehend what is happening, and he 100%ed it. That is amazing. Well done, Carney Jarrett. Congratulations. Seriously, just well done. At number 2, somebody actually created for $22 in parts gloves that work in VR way better than anything else. Like, the thing that's a problem in VR with a lot of it is this problem in which holding things is kind of weird. Either you hold a hand controller and pull a trigger and that closes a hand, which is clunky considering the immersion that you're supposed to be feeling. Or a few other games have tried different solutions that are frankly kind of weird too. A guy named Lucas VR Tech made a open source alternative that uses strings and motors and does really good finger tracking, as well as actually like restricting your hand motion so it feels like you're holding something. That is compatible with Half-Life Alyx. Like, in all honesty, look at how this thing works. It's brilliant, and the fact that it's open source is just, it's cool as hell. Good job, Lucas. And finally, at number 1, some leaked evidence pointed to Electronic Arts pushing FIFA players to purchase loot boxes using some frankly questionable language. Now, EA, for their part, has denied. They said this is a sensationalized story with a misrepresentation of facts, and they defended themselves by saying, we don't push people to spend in our games, and claimed to offer a safe and fun experience, blah, blah, blah. But here's the problem. In these leaked documents that people recovered, this was just blatantly forwardly said. Players will be actively messaged and incentivized to convert throughout the summer. Now, if you know anything about business, convert means convert someone who isn't a customer into a customer, for the most part. It may be used in some other context, but just to be sure that you understand. Even though they're like, yeah, it's sensationalized. I mean, that's a pretty blatant example of the thing that they're being accused of, is it not? I don't think anybody really likes over-monetizing games, and we all know EA does the hell out of it, so But what do you think? Leave us a comment, let us know. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. The best way to see them first is, of course, the subscription. So click subscribe. Don't forget to enable all notifications. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon Hero. We'll see you next time right here on Game Ranks. The gaming world is weird, and every month we round up the weirdest stories for you. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Game Ranks, the weird gaming stories of July 2020. Starting off at number 10.
A 15-year-old Chinese kid was paralyzed in the arm and hand after playing computer games for 22 hours a day for a full month. Now, as you know, there's a thing going on that is keeping people in their houses, but it is kind of a little bit on the obsession side rather than the passing time side, because a human being does need more than 2 hours of sleep a day. He was sent to the hospital after he passed out, which no idea why that happened. Maybe it was the 2 hours max of sleep a night, but he couldn't move his hand. At number 9, way back when Pokemon was first starting and it wasn't really a sure thing that it'd be a success in the United States, it was believed by the Nintendo American staff that kids wouldn't want to play a game with tons of text and that Pokemon would ultimately be an adult thing in the US. And as such, there was a proposal to change Pikachu into, and this is a direct quote, something like a tiger with huge breasts. Now, fortunately, they didn't go through with that. Not that I dislike huge breasts or anything. It's very much the opposite, actually. But that would have been really weird to not have Pikachu in favor of that. Ishihara, the CEO of the Pokemon Company, said the proposal looked like something out of the musical Cats. And I think we all know how the musical Cats came out once it made its national debut outside of the Broadway sphere. Not great. Maybe would have done better had they concentrated a little bit more on, the obvious aspect of this proposal. But hey, we got Pikachu. That's great, right? Yes. Not going to give you an opportunity to answer that one. Pikachu is definitely better. At number 8, Taiwanese police returned a lost Nintendo Switch by messaging people on the friend list in Animal Crossing of the person who owned it. Now, the weird part about this story is how great the Taiwanese police sound. Wow. Or maybe the weirder thing is how little there's going on in Taiwan that this is what the Taiwanese police are doing. I don't know. I'm guessing Taiwan is at the same kind of standstill everywhere else is, but still, that's awesome. What happened was the person who owned the Nintendo Switch was getting money out of an ATM, and as he did that, he put the Switch on top of the ATM. And when it failed to detonate, everybody suspected it might not actually be a bomb. That's of course a joke. I'm sure in Taiwan that's not the immediate thought of everything that's left in public, as it is in America. Anyways, a stranger picked it up and dropped it off at the police, and the police were like, let's play Animal Crossing. And then, after a secret 6 hours in the game, they realized, this is somebody else's machine. We should give it back. We are the police after all. That is, of course, also a joke. Maybe. At number 7, Fox Sports is going to add fake people to baseball games because it would look weird without a crowd. And I'm not going to deny that's definitely true. And we're not going to be putting, tons of people within that tiny little area anytime soon, given what's going on. But I don't know, maybe it's going to be weirder than an empty stadium, to be honest. There's an uncanny valley quality to it that is palpable, I guess is the right word. To me, watching the video of the systems they're putting in place, it seems very obvious that the crowd is fake. It doesn't track completely with the live TV. Some shots don't contain any of the Unreal Engine fans because it's just not possible with every single angle in the stadium. So, yeah, a Fox Sports executive said, our goal is to make sure that the view looks normal, and I'm going to go ahead and say that this does not help with that. There are some shots, I'm not going to lie, that are fairly convincing, but for the most part, no. It's a bad idea. It looks strange. That's to say the very least. And it's going to get weirder as AI is introduced to it, I promise you that. If we're going to have the uncanny valley, why don't we just, simulate the baseball game? Boot up MLB and just watch the computer play against itself. At number 6, they created a mod that boots Windows 95 inside Minecraft, which we're really starting to get on an abstract level here. Let's have a computer within a virtual world play Doom. Which is, what they did. That's, of course, the test that people do with this type of a mod. And they did it. It runs Doom. I'm not going to say that it's as impressive as if they built the machines out of redstone, because that's not the case. That's not what happened. It's a mod. But it's pretty impressive nonetheless. You can also boot various other operating systems in Minecraft, and in theory, probably boot a lot of other things. And I'm sure that we'll see that happen in the coming months.
At number 5, a pet fish is attempting to beat Pokemon Ruby in Japan. And wow, it's actually really interesting, although probably not to watch. There's a live stream going on in which the owner of a fish, a blue beta, to get specific, has motion tracking inside of his cage, which is hooked up to a GameCube playing Pokemon Ruby. Now, as the fish moves around, it basically places various button inputs into the game, and slowly but surely, the fish is progressing in the game. The fish has actually won 2 gym badges. However, it is so arduous. For instance, to get out into the field, it took the fish about 59 hours, which, I mean, we're talking about a very short period of time in human gameplay. It's not bad though, considering the fish doesn't know it's playing a video game, obviously. And even if it did, there's little chance it would really comprehend the game itself. But hey, always interesting to see this type of thing. At number 4, this very derivative game, which takes a lot from Dark Souls, from Monster Hunter, and most notably from Legend of Zelda, got itself pulled from the Nintendo eShop. It's called Final Sword, and it's very clearly modeled after Zelda. Although it's bad, it has bad animation, bad physics, and tons of awful bugs, which actually make it worth playing because it's, not a good game otherwise. However, everything is hilarious in the game. The big problem, however, that got it pulled was not how it's very clearly inspired by Zelda in more than a couple of ways, was that they actually used Zelda's lullaby in the game. They claim they bought it from a third-party music provider and didn't realize how much it quote-unquote resembled Zelda's lullaby, but look at this game. It's very clearly trying to be Zelda. The developers have heard that song, period. At number 3, Gabe Newell, who has absolutely no stake in which gaming console does better on account everything about Gabe Newell is about how PC is better than both. He owes his entire career to that in every possible way. Gabe decided that he was going to say Xbox is better than PlayStation 5. Now, he didn't really give any reasons. He said because it is. So I don't know exactly how serious he is, or if he's just trolling and trying to get some people angry, or make some people happy. I really don't know. Also, I don't know why you would even care, to be honest with you. Gabe Newell is Mr. PC Gaming, King PC Gaming, the emperor of that. It's not that I agree or disagree with him. I haven't been able to actually use either console personally, so I can't really provide some sort of rebuttal or even agree with him. But what's weird to me is just doing this, getting into this fight. It seems like a weird thing to do. Something that perhaps somebody who likes to watch people fight with each other, like gladiators, might want to do. You're sick, Gabe, and you need to get better. At number 2, Metacritic came up with this new 36-hour waiting period for allowing user reviews on games. The game has to be out for 36 hours because the company is tired of people review bombing games that they clearly haven't had the time to play. If you go to the review page for a newly released title, during that 36-hour period, you're now greeted with a message that says, please spend some time playing the game, which is a little maybe condescending. I don't necessarily disagree with the idea on account Ghosts of Tsushima certainly got that. The new Paper Mario certainly got that. And I get where they're coming from, because frankly, these are games that should be played for a while before you actually render a judgment upon them. But I also feel like they probably could have done it in a way that felt a little less like a slap in the face for having an opinion. And finally, at number 1, people are finally getting kind of annoyed by the fact Star Citizen is still doing that, that thing it does. And it's been doing that thing since 2012 when they crowdfunded it. People paid money, people waited, they, got them to pay more money somehow. And here we are. The single-player campaign of the game, called Squadron 42, was due in 2016. That's still not out. And during the course of the month, Cloud Imperium, the developers of the game, released a roadmap about how they plan to create a roadmap. It's a 4-step plan, basically. Give an explanation of a future roadmap, show a rough mock-up of the future roadmap, share a work-in-progress version of the roadmap, and finally transition to the new roadmap. People didn't like this. Who can blame them either? If we're going with Inception metaphors, we're down in limbo as far as roadmaps go. This, is the most ridiculous thing I've seen out of this.
And they've raised over $300 million for this game. That isn't out. And they started raising that money in 2012. That's 8 years ago. You know how many games have been made over the last 8 years with way less money than that? They've been working on Cyberpunk 2077 since 2015, and the highest estimate I can find for the budget of the game is $220 million. And yeah, that game did get delayed, but not like Star Citizen has. At this point, I'm gonna go ahead and say everything they do is weird, but this roadmap to a roadmap, I think just ties it all together in the most weird yet completely expected sort of way. Couple of bonuses for you. A $1,500 ergonomic gaming chair was released, which apparently provides 150 points of support. Now, I haven't sat in it, so I can't tell you if it's great or if it's a dud, but I can tell you that the way I sit in a gaming chair, no matter how nice, the 150 points of comfort are probably not going to do a lot for me. I tend to lean forward into the screen like an absolute dope. Also, a sealed copy of Super Mario Brothers sold for $114,000. And you know what that's making me say to myself? Crap. I feel very dumb about some of the choices I've made in my life. Microsoft Flight Simulator's Physical Edition will include 10 discs. Also a printed manual, but I don't think that's too strange. I just think it's super weird to have 10 double-layered DVDs, and it just feels bizarre. I mean, it's only 90 gigabytes, so it's not really, shocking in size. These are dual-layered DVDs, like I said, not Blu-rays. And it primarily is the world and the aircraft that take up that space. Apparently, the code itself isn't really particularly massive. But hey, if you don't want to download the game, you can buy it this way. It'll feel weird as you install it. It'll remind you of a time long past. But I don't remember any games ever being 10 discs. That's excessive. Anyways, that's all for today. Was that sufficiently weird for you? Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe, and don't forget to enable all notifications. As always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter, Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on Game Ranks. Some games tell you exactly how to play them, and some don't. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Game Ranks, 10 hidden mechanics big games forgot to tell you. Starting off at number 10 in Horizon Zero Dawn, did you know that as you hunt and kill the machines, they don't just remain stationary, they actually evolve. What's interesting about it is it doesn't scale with your level or anything. It depends on how many times you've killed certain enemies. Some of them, like a Broadhead or a Scrapper or even a Strider, you have to kill a bunch of times, 10 to 15 in fact. Whereas with something like the Stormbird, you only have to kill one single time and it evolves. Now, this is a mechanic that is just not discussed anywhere in the game or any material about the game. It's something the developers just did off in the background, and honestly, it makes a lot of sense with the story, the world. I mean, given the fact that you're in a post-apocalyptic world where machines evolve to dominance over human society, it's actually kind of cool. It's a mechanic that really fits in with the story. And in some respects, it's really cool that they don't bother telling you. It's just a little background detail that forces the world to maintain itself and also changes the difficulty level of the game depending on how progressive you are. At number 9 is Final Fantasy VIII's level scaling. Now, this is something that a lot of players probably wish they'd known. Enemies and bosses scale to your level in Final Fantasy VIII. So in contrast to every single other Final Fantasy game, grinding means nothing. It's dumb, it's pointless, it means nothing. It's worse than pointless even. If you go grinding for levels to power up before a tough fight, you actually make the game harder. In this game, leveling up does very little to increase your stats. Most stat gains are just from using the junctioning system, which is complicated and weird too, but it does explain it to you.
But enemies get pretty significant stat boosts when you level up, so if you're leveling up without making use of the junction system, you're just making the game harder. That's it. That's all that's happening. Of course, this is also how a lot of players completely break the game's difficulty. They stay low level, abuse the junction system, and make themselves super overpowered. They avoid all enemy encounters, they stay low level, and they just steamroll the bosses like it's nothing. In general, it's kind of an underexplained and even a little poorly designed system, but if you like min-maxing to destroy a game's difficulty, it's pretty awesome. I don't know, there's some level of feeling kind of like you're cheating, but you're really just doing the system the way it incentivizes you to. And number 8 is Demon Souls' world tendency. The games of From Software like Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Sekiro are absolutely filled with unexplained mechanics. It's practically a staple of the series, and part of the reason fans like these games is because of the mystery they sort of create. But probably the most baffling and mysterious of any mechanic in any of their games is world tendency from Demon Souls. It's basically a mechanic that affects how easy or difficult a world is. Your world tendency is determined by a few factors. It'll move towards white when you kill demon bosses and certain unique enemies. White makes the game easier, of course. It makes it so you have more health and soul form, healing items drop more frequently, and enemies are weaker, etc., etc. But on the other hand, it moves towards black when you die in a world or kill certain NPCs. In general, this makes your game harder. You have less health in soul form, and enemies have increased HP, increased attack, increased defense. So basically dying a lot in the game can make it harder, which is maybe a little counterintuitive, but there's pretty much no way to know without looking it up. So you might die at the game because it's too hard for you, and then find that it's harder, and just be like, why don't I get better at this game? It's just meaner to me gradually. Am I getting worse? Black World Tendency has some other weird effects too, like making some things called primeval demons showed up. It's actually pretty interesting, but the game it says nothing about it.
I am a humble servant. I do not wish to interfere.
At number 7, Hotline Miami allows you to take a human shield. Now, it was a pretty common mechanic seen in third-person shooters in the 6th and 7th generation of consoles, but you can take people hostage in Hotline Miami, a sort of retro game. It is a violent action game, so it's not like out of place or anything, but it really just doesn't tell you or explain to you that it's something you can do or how to do it. The requirements are really specific too. You have to have a one-handed gun like a pistol, and you have to execute a knockdown enemy. Remember, pistols are pretty rare in Hotline Miami. Two-handed guns are really the order of the day, and knocking down an enemy with a pistol equipped is tricky, forcing you to either quickly pick up a pistol after knocking the enemy down, or knocking them down from kicking in a door. A lot of people beat the game without even realizing you can take a human shield, and a lot of people only do it to get the achievement. And really, taking someone hostage isn't really that useful in the game. It can absorb a bullet, but no matter how fast the action is, you're probably just putting yourself in more danger by engaging in the process of taking a human shield rather than less. The feature was so underused, they just didn't even bother with it with the sequel. They removed it. Although they probably could have told people it was there. That might have done something. But, you know, whatever. At number 6 is Resident Evil 6 and the secret moves that it has. Considered the black sheep of the mainline Resident Evil games, number 6 is a crazy game. It's wild. What? There's a lot of pretty interesting secret abilities and moves that are just never explained at all. Plural, multiple, many. Like, you can recover from knockdowns, for instance, immediately by pressing back and dodge, or you can instantly revive yourself after getting downed if you've got first aid spray equipped. They don't tell you that. That's tremendously useful. Nothing. Another one is if you press RB plus X, you'll automatically combine all your herbs. Meleeing with your back to an enemy makes you do an elbow strike, which is easy to follow up with another attack. If you got a knife equipped as Chris, you can do a double slash while dodging backwards, or pressing RT and down, which gets you to do a stab attack. The amount of different moves and abilities you have is up there with a Metal Gear game. It's something no one expected, and most people didn't even realize it's possible even while playing the game. And, it actually makes the game a lot more fun, by the way, to know these things, which is perhaps the most irritating element of it, because they tell you none of it. At number 5 is Pac-Man's Ghost AI. We've all seen Pac-Man, and although it may seem like ghosts, you have to avoid just move in like a random pattern, and that's what you do. It's actually not the case. Blinky the Red Ghost chases Pac-Man, so basically they follow his movements. Pinky, the pink ghost, is an ambusher and tries to get in front of Pac-Man. Inky, the cyan ghost, is said to be the same as Pinky, but what's actually going on is Inky patrols the area. From the player's perspective, it might as well be random, however, it's a patrol action. Last, Clyde, who doesn't have a rhyming name, he's orange and moves around randomly, actually randomly, and tries to stay away from Pac-Man altogether. Knowing how each ghost operates can actually make playing Pac-Man a little easier, and keeping in mind a little easier. Not a lot, but a little. At number 4, the entire Donkey Kong Country series jump roll. It's an ability that's in pretty much every Donkey Kong Country game, which, by the way, I have played and beaten all of the 2D games. They're phenomenal, each and every one. But I mean, you're never told this, but if you roll off a ledge, you have a brief window of time where you can still jump even as you're falling, which is an incredibly useful skill that you sometimes literally have to use if you want to get all the secrets in a level. A lot of people have finished these games without having any idea you can do this, and for them it just seemed like there were a few hidden secrets that were just impossible to reach. It's a classic ability that's barely explained, and it's basically the precursor to the coyote time we see in a lot of modern platformers like Celeste that make it so you can jump even after falling off a ledge. It's a great ability once you know about it, but it might take a lot of deaths before you realize it's even possible. And developing the sensibility of timing can take a while as well.
And number 3 are the secret ending choices to Silent Hill 2. Something that makes sense for the game not to tell you, let's be frank. But the end of the game is determined by a bunch of secret factors that have to do with how you play the game. In most games, your ending is determined by some kind of choice, but in this game, the end happens based on a bunch of tiny little triggers. Like you get the leave ending if you play the game like you want to survive. Let's say you heal immediately after getting hurt, or don't listen to Maria and you listen to the sickbed conversation with Mary before the last boss. Very specific. On the other hand, if you want to see the in-water ending, you have to play the game in a little bit more of a suicidal manner. You leave your health in the red a lot, you look at Angela's knife and listen to a recording on the desk in the Nightmare Hotel, and no one tells you any of this. The endings are all really different, and so is how you get them. Although I would say how you get them is even more arbitrary. If you want to see all of them, you're pretty much just going to have to go online and get a guide, because you're not going to figure it out. Not on your own. That's not going to happen. At number 2 is Kingdom Hearts 1's character questionnaire. This one's bizarre. It's hidden from you in the original Kingdom Hearts, which, almost everything is at least obscure in some way in Kingdom Hearts. But it's something that can make a pretty noticeable difference, and you might not even realize it was a thing. In the beginning of the game, you get the choice between a few weapons, the sword, the rod, and the shield. Obviously, this affects what weapons you can use, but after you go to Destiny Island and some fun fantasy characters make your acquaintance, they'll ask you some random questions. You probably won't know the first time through, but the questions determine basically how you'll gain experience at different levels. The first option on all the questions makes it so you gain levels faster up to level 50 and then slower from 50 to 100. Selecting the second option for the questions makes it more balanced. It's the same for 1 through 100. The third option makes it so that you gain experience between 1 and 50 slower and 5 and 100 faster. Why is this in the game? I have no idea. In fact, it seems arbitrary and strange, but it is Kingdom Hearts, so there's a lot of arbitrary and strange things in those games. And finally, at number 1 in the Pokemon series, the Effort Value Training, or EVs. Pokemon games are stuffed with hidden, obscure, and all-around unexplained game mechanics, but probably the most arcane, the EV. It's called base points in the early games, but these values can affect a Pokemon's stats. And it's really complicated. Like, if you crunch the numbers and do things to improve EVs, you will get a more powerful Pokemon, but it's not going to be something that you understand right off. And they don't explain it, obviously, otherwise we wouldn't have put it on this list. If you're big into Pokemon games, you heard all this before, cool. But if not, it does seem impossibly complicated and quite a mountain to climb. How you improve EVs seems to change drastically from game to game, too, so, they've become slightly less complicated through the years, but still. Maybe the weirdest part of the whole thing is the Pokerus, or Pokemon Virus from Generation 2. That's a rare status ailment that doubles the effort points you gain in battle.
If it were a single-player only game, it would really be pretty unimportant, but people love to play Pokemon competitively, so making your Pokemon as powerful as possible is something a lot of people are serious about doing. And if you want a Pokemon with the best stats, you're going to have to deal with EVs. But like I said, they're tremendously complicated, and this is a minute of a video. Not possible to explain it. Take my word on it. That's a bunch of complicated stuff that games didn't explain to you. What do you think? Leave us a comment. Let us know. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. The best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe, and don't forget to enable all notifications. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter, @FalconTheHero. We'll see you next time right here on Game Ranks.
Sometimes game developers do some really interesting things to make a video game truly work and convince you, the player, that something on screen is actually happening. So today we're talking about 10 things video games use to trick your brain. We've done a video like this in the past. I definitely recommend checking that out, but we found way more tools and trickery that developers use to make the video games that we love happen. And it all feels like magic, and we're fascinated. Also, I want to point out that we're not experts. We're going to try to explain this stuff the best we can because it's fascinating. So let's get started off with number 10 and talk about Mario, of all people. This one's actually a bit more civilian, it's a bit more standard, and you may have actually realized it when you're playing, but it's still worth discussing. We wanted to reference a specific interview from Gama Sutra, an interview with Koichi Hayashida, who was the director of Super Mario 3D Land and Super Mario Galaxy 2. He talks about a technique that from the beginning was utilized by Shigeru Miyamoto, and it's basically using level design to introduce players to gameplay concepts. The gameplay concepts, like a game mechanic or specific ability, will influence the actual design of that level to teach you how to use it properly in different situations and not just give you a regular boring on-screen tutorial. And I quote, "First, you have to learn how to use that gameplay mechanic, and then the stage will offer you a slightly more complicated scenario in which you have to use it. And then the next step is something crazy happens that makes you think about it in a new way you weren't expecting. And then you get to demonstrate, finally, what sort of mastery you've gained over it." Now, I know this isn't the biggest trick. I know many of us have realized that this has happened to us while we're playing. Like, okay, I got the thing. That's how I use the thing. Clearly, I need to use that thing to open the door to get out and continue my adventure. But it's interesting to talk about, especially because he compared it to a narrative structure in Japanese manga. It's a phrase called kiso tenketsu. Hayashida said specifically that it was Shigeru Miyamoto who brought this manga concept over to video game development, and that's pretty cool. Now, next up at number 9, you are going to notice that throughout this video, we're going to be referencing random Twitter threads that have gone down throughout the years where people shared their stories in game development of how they used mechanics to trick players. Here's a great example. In a response to a thread by @GaoMe in 2017, Charlie Cleveland, a director and designer for Subnautica, said, "In Subnautica, we fade to black as you run out of oxygen, but then give you a few more phantom seconds for lots of just barely moments." This is a great example of something that a lot of game developers do, and I think we've talked about this in the past, where essentially you actually have a little bit more health than the game actually indicates or tells you. Just a little extra sliver when you get past 0 to make it really feel like you just barely survived, like you got through by the skin of your teeth. And I gotta say, it's definitely a cruel trick. It's almost basically a lie. Maybe the bottom of your health bar, you know, your last 1 or 2% of your life bar is actually a lie, but hey, it does make the game pretty fun, and I definitely know for sure that Subnautica is not the only game that has done this. Now, next at number 8, let's talk about level design and a cool trick that IO Interactive does with Hitman. The modern reboots of Hitman, you know, the new Hitman and then Hitman 2, have felt like they were just absolutely massive, from the possibilities you could do in the levels to the actual size and scale of the levels themselves. In an interview with Rock Paper Shotgun, IO Interactive's Torbjorn Christensen explained that they got their levels, specifically like Sapienza and Hokkaido, to feel so expansive and just ongoing by designing the game as what he called, and I quote, snail houses, or just giant spirals. The idea behind that, in short, is basically always giving the player a new direction to go and a new interesting thing to focus on, always having focal points, a new place to walk, a new place to turn, not a lot of dead ends. He said, and I quote, "One of the reasons why all these levels feel larger than maybe they are in terms of square meters is that you can keep moving ahead all of the time. There are no dead ends and you never have to backtrack, although you can if you want. Basically, it's all about flow and keeping the player moving. So if you actually stop and look at the world, maybe there's a bit too many doors or an overwhelming amount of staircases or just things going on. It's so you can kind of keep moving as the player and feel like you're walking through a giant map. It's really interesting, and honestly, we're going to link as many of the interviews as we can down in the description below because it's worth reading up on. Now, next at number 7, another reply to that thread we mentioned earlier is from game developer Steve Thornton. He is a level designer, and he admitted on Twitter, and I quote, "In some LEGO games, ranged enemies have hit-miss probability, and on a miss, the projectiles are offset but also have no collision, just in case. This allows enemies to shoot really often to create a manic feeling of being under fire and to ensure players also don't walk into an offset miss." Another developer, Raicha7, followed up and said, "We use this a lot in the blaster battles of LEGO Force Awakens. We also spawned lots of fake bolts off screen as well to add to the chaos." Basically, what they're trying to do in the LEGO games here is create the tension and the chaos of a shootout without the player actually being at risk of being hit by a million different bullets flying around. The idea was to have an enemy shoot a lot and make it chaotic, but because they have the hit or miss probability, they made sure that those laser beams, if there are more players on screen at once, couldn't actually be hit by a miss, if that makes sense. So while it looks chaotic and crazy and dangerous, it's not as impossible or as difficult as you think. Pretty fun food for thought, and honestly, I'm really curious to see how many other games do stuff like this. Now, next down to number 6, we have to talk about PT because thankfully a couple of years ago, the famous Lance McDonald hacked the game and revealed that Hideo Kojima's weird playable teaser horror game actually had a ghost that was just always right off screen, ready to scare you. Basically, it looks like Kojima and his team did a very literal trick to make it feel like you're always being followed, always being haunted by a ghost that you only really see in specific instances, but you kind of always get that feeling that they're there. Sometimes you catch a shadow, sometimes the light just plays tricks on you as you endlessly walk through these hallways, and sometimes she gets you. But really, after hacking the camera, Lance McDonald revealed that the ghost Lisa is actually tethered behind you at all times, which is absolutely horrifying, dude. It's kind of cool though, and I really like it because there's of course so many other tricks developers could have used to scare you, the player, but the fact that they decided to actually, in the technicality of it, have the ghost behind you at all times is actually really sweet and just makes PT even more fascinating than it already is. I feel like this is the weird little game demo that is just a gift that keeps on giving to gamers the more we find out about it, and we're always going to be talking about it because it kicked ass. Now at number 5, Mario 64's endless stairs trick. You probably remember in this game running up those stairs that seem like they're never ending. And basically, that stair thing is a trick. A lot of games, especially back then, couldn't actually fit a giant endless staircase on the game's cart, so, of course, they used some trickery. What the developers used is a relative teleport, essentially. The game will teleport you backwards when you reach a certain step threshold, and then you're very seamlessly pushed down a couple of steps without actually realizing because you're in the middle of running, and it makes it feel endless. Did I explain that okay? This is something that has been debated online. It's hard to find like official confirmation on it, but from what we've seen, it does seem like it's a pretty cool and believable thing. Still, I think it's really impressive to point out that even for such an old game, when you're doing it and it is teleporting you, you do not realize at all. That is super clean and impressive if you ask me. Now, next at number 4, here's a really funny one. This is a response to a Twitter thread similar to the one we talked about previously, started by @the_Rami in 2018. Senior games designer James Henley described a very interesting predicament from Mass Effect 1. He said, and I quote, "I was building a fight with small turrets, but we didn't actually have any. Instead, I built a couple of small boxes, shoving flying drones into them, and deleted all movement nodes from their playpen. Consequently, they never tried to move and they just sat there shooting." He then said later on in a thread that this was in Fist's office in the back of Cora's den on the Citadel. And basically, a simple version of what he's explaining is that the game didn't have any type of turrets, so he took an asset or a thing already designed in the game and conformed it and messed with it to make it a turret. So yes, if you encountered those turrets in that office on the Citadel, what you were fighting against, what was actually shooting at you, wasn't really technically a turret, but you didn't know at the time, did you? It definitely convinced you, right? That's exactly what we're talking about here. Video game development tricks that can completely convince your brain. Now down to number 3, here's an interesting one from Warframe. Warframe is honestly a game that just keeps on going and gets better and better, and now has a massive community that is downright in love with it. And one of the biggest changes to Warframe, especially if you just played it at launch many years ago, is that there are actually ships in the game, and ship-to-ship space combat. Now space games, especially ones like No Man's Sky or Elite Dangerous or EVE Online, they're incredibly complex under the hood and behind the scenes. It requires a lot of math, a lot of game design work, and well, basically Digital Extremes found a quick and dirty workaround, and it totally makes sense. Apparently Digital Extremes had some issue with the fact that it's really ambitious. You can fly around your ship, you can walk around your ship, you can get out of your ship, you can board other ships, all while floating through space, and that's a lot for a game that wasn't actually designed to be like that in the first place. But the biggest trick here, the thing they did to really convince you the player, is that the ship itself isn't actually moving. Shout out to PC Gamer for breaking this down in a simplistic way, but basically, the developers are using an old school video game technique called portal rendering, which kind of works like the puzzles in Portal. So basically, the game presents a giant portal that is going to somewhere else, and to quote PC Gamer, when you look through it, you see it from a different perspective. So the cockpit of Warframe's ships is actually like a big portal into a completely different map. And to quote designer Steve Sinclair, the trick of our space battles is an ancient rendering technique twisted. You see your ship interior, but windows are a portal attached to the Railjack entity itself in the combat zone, which itself looks into the art space skybox. So essentially what this is kind of a simple solution to a complex problem, but still it's kind of hard and weird to explain, to the point where the PC Gamer interview says that some Digital Extreme programmers were actually confused by it. Still, I think it's a great example of the fact that video games, from their inception, the development of them is basically a miracle. A lot of it is magic, and that magic is essentially smart people coming up with cool tricks. And since we are talking about tricks, since we're coming down to number 2, let's talk about a negative one for a second. Certain free-to-play games, particularly on mobile and web, are designed to create discomfort, and then essentially the player seeks out a solution to that discomfort, but oftentimes that discomfort is some sort of monetization or paying for something or some sort of solution like that. Lots of free-to-play games have been built like this, and they take advantage of this. There are developers going on record. There are articles written about how these things work, even down to something like an endless clicker game. They are designed to be like mindless diversions, but if you want some sort of instant satisfaction, or if you want to make it a little bit more convenient for you, you can throw a little bit of money at that game to have usually a temporary solution. Lots of developers of specific games know that a lot of players don't want to spend a single penny, so they slowly break down your resolve over time. But the bottom line to be argued is that trick that a lot of people call it, where a game essentially is built to present a challenge to you and then give you a way to overcome that challenge, and sometimes that challenge is you spending money. It's unfortunate. Thankfully, most people are wise to it by now. We've talked about this type of stuff on the channel before. Still, a lot of mobile games are very guilty of it, so just be aware next time, all right? Now down to number 1, we want to talk about a trick that is downright spooky. You hear rumors about it, it floats around out there. We've tried to find what we can on it. It seems like it's definitely likely, but apparently the mannequins in Skyrim are actually NPC models that have their AI disabled. Yes, the actual mannequins that can sit in your houses in the game where you put your armor on and stuff, they are actually a specific NPC model that is just like a humanoid mannequin. So they can essentially operate and work like any AI in the game. They have the capability, it's just switched to off. Now, of course, there are many times where people have examples of loading into a game and loading into their house only to see something is a little off, like maybe the mannequin is slightly moved to the side or just in a slightly different position, or sometimes in weirder cases, people have seen mannequins moving around or stopping and suddenly looking at them. A lot of people like to joke that it's essentially like as the game is loading, all the mannequins are running and standing in place and getting ready for then you, the player, to enter, and then they stand completely still, almost like something on a Toy Story. But it's really messed up. The fact that they're essentially frozen NPCs is downright haunting, and really kind of backs up the theory that a lot of people have had in many video games where it feels like the mannequins are watching you. Still, it's what they did, probably a quick and dirty trick to get a nice, easy, interactable mannequin. And things like that and tricks like that happen in game development every day, and we like pointing them out, at least for the layman, as much as we can. We want to hear from you guys down in the comments what sort of developer tricks you know of, and what you enjoy, or maybe something you've uncovered, or maybe you've broken in. Let us know. We'd love to hear from you. But if you enjoyed this video and maybe learned something, clicking the like button is the best way you can help us out. We really appreciate that. And if you're new, consider subscribing, maybe hitting that notification bell, because we put out videos every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.
It's too far away.
Can you think of a single game series that has had as much impact on video games themselves as Grand Theft Auto? One might characterize that impact as grand.
Let's go have the time of our lives.
But Grand Theft Auto has not always been what it is today. In fact, it is extremely different, at least visually, and in a few less ways, but still some notable ways mechanically, as it was when it first came out in 1997. Gaming itself was very different back then, and you could actually credit Grand Theft Auto for that, at least partially. And today, GameRanks wants to take you on a trip through the evolution of Grand Theft Auto. Now, as I said, the original Grand Theft Auto came out in 1997, but we have a little ways to go to get there. In April of 1995, DMA Design, a company founded in 1987 in Dundee, Scotland, began development on a title called Race and Chase. Now, you can find some various mock-ups for Race and Chase, and you can tell they definitely had the idea for Grand Theft Auto and ran with it. Race and Chase was originally intended to be a cops and robbers style game, but the developers kind of decided that being a robber was a little bit more fun. And who can blame them? The gameplay ideas generally remained somewhat the same, however, and like I said, if you see those mock-ups, you can tell they were like, this would be a fun gameplay style. But it wasn't an idea they had just utterly out of the blue. There was a 1986 game called Miami Vice, which is based on the TV show, that looked very similar to what Grand Theft Auto is. It was a game that had very mixed reviews, and most people were very hard on both the graphics and particularly the bad mechanics of gameplay. Also, you could only get out of the car at specific buildings where things were designated to be happening, and it most certainly wasn't what you would call an open world game. It kind of maintained the illusion of a bit of freedom, but really you could only do things at certain times, in certain places, otherwise you were just kind of driving around aimlessly. Which, I mean, in a 2016 game would qualify as open world, but in 1986, it literally meant you kind of were able to go in 8 directions with nothing going on. Most notably, you were playing the part of the police, as Miami Vice was a police show. Gary Penn, the creative director of DMA Design, cited Elite as a big influence as well. Now, Elite is quite a bit different than Grand Theft Auto if you ask me, but he believed that structurally they were very similar. You took on jobs, though in Grand Theft Auto it's in a different way and in a much more realistic setting, but the team was inspired by that series as well. The absolute original thought for creating Grand Theft Auto, the idea, the purpose, was to produce a fun, addictive, and fast multiplayer car racing and crashing game that uses a novel graphics method. The original Grand Theft Auto was technically a 2D game that was rendered in 3D. The map was modeled in 3D, but the camera was fixed in a top-down angle. The characters and cars are all sprites, and the game could have functioned exactly as is if the entire thing were sprites. In that respect, it was definitely a novel graphics presentation, going much further than it really needed to in order to distinguish itself visually from other games. If there was no 3D element, you could probably make the case that it was just like any other top-down game, especially any other top-down game with cars. There has been an exorbitant amount of those throughout the years, and Grand Theft Auto certainly wasn't the first. But even from a visual perspective, it was unique. To describe the gameplay would sound very similar to what Grand Theft Auto's gameplay is today, however, it obviously operated a lot differently due to the difference in perspective and technology of the time. But essentially, you stole cars, showed up to places, took crime lords' missions, and made some cash. Oh, and you were able to listen to the radio while you did it. Tons of different radio stations with a bunch of different music colored your experience in the game, and in my opinion, really made it a lot more interesting than it would have been without it. The original Grand Theft Auto took place in 3 cities: Liberty City, Vice City, and San Andreas. Liberty City being New York City,
Vice City being based on Miami, and San Andreas being parts of California and Nevada. Obviously, over the years, they remained very committed to these settings and like to update them in each generation of the Grand Theft Auto series. Grand Theft Auto was originally going to have a 4-year development time, but was actually produced in a little bit over 1 year, which is pretty impressive. It was going to be out on MS-DOS, Microsoft Windows, PlayStation, Game Boy Color, Sega Saturn, and Nintendo 64. And it made it to all of those platforms except for Sega Saturn and Nintendo 64. The Sega Saturn version was originally going to happen at the same time the PlayStation one, but everybody hated the Sega Saturn, so they were like, no, actually let's stop. However, the Game Boy Color game did come out, and that's notable on account they actually managed to fit the entire game, in no way changed other than colors, obviously, and also censored quite a bit because it was a very adult game on a very kid platform. But the entire map, tile for tile, is accurate to the real PC version, and although it's not 3D, that's still pretty impressive. Most Game Boy ports, color or otherwise, were generally abridged versions of the games on account you couldn't really fit the whole thing into a Game Boy Color game, but somehow they managed it. The next entries used the same engine as the original Grand Theft Auto, but had one very notable difference. Where Grand Theft Auto takes place in fictional representations of a few American cities, Grand Theft Auto London 1969 and London 1961 are two expansion packs that were released that take place in actual London. Now, that doesn't mean they're a map of London that's transferred into the Grand Theft Auto engine. They aren't completely accurate, but it's meant to be London. They didn't really add any gameplay elements, but both feature a lot of humor at the expense of British people, including heavy usage of stereotypical Cockney slang and even a James Bond-looking character. Grand Theft Auto 2 actually came out the same year in 1999 and shifted the setting to another fictional place called Anywhere, USA. It's a slightly retro-futuristic metropolis, but says that it's 3 weeks in the future. The setup's super weird, but who cares? There's 7 different gangs. The mechanics are updated just a little bit. For instance, saving. You're allowed to do it more than just at the end of the level. If you had 50 grand and happened to know where a church was, that was it. You could save. They also very much ramped up pedestrian activity, where NPCs, depending on who they are and who they're near, might engage in fights. There are other criminals, including carjackers and muggers, and people even use taxis. In fact, side missions were introduced in Grand Theft Auto 2, like becoming a taxi driver, bus driver, or semi-truck driver. Also in Grand Theft Auto 2, ambulances started appearing when people are injured, which you could then steal, and just basically cause more havoc. However, the reviews for Grand Theft Auto 2 were a little bit more mixed than the originals. People weren't very impressed that the graphics had essentially not changed. They were a little bit better, but not noticeably so. At the same time, a complex series of business moves had landed DMA Design in the ownership of several different companies over the course of 2 years. Between Grand Theft Auto 2 in 1999 and Grand Theft Auto 3 in 2001, DMA Design had come to be owned by a company that had just changed its name to Rockstar Games, which had also recently been sold to Take-Two Interactive. But given the mixed reviews of Grand Theft Auto 2, DMA Design knew that they had to do something bigger for Grand Theft Auto 3.
Sorry, babe. I'm an ambitious girl.
So they opted to do full 3D, and they opted to do it on the PlayStation 2. At the time, the PlayStation 2 was the most popular console, and capable of some pretty damn cool stuff. DMA decided to use renderware, which is essentially somewhere between an API and a game engine, which was aimed at making development on the PlayStation 2 a little bit easier. A lot of people called it Sony's DirectX. What they found when designing the 3D world of Grand Theft Auto 3 was that it was completely impossible to fit the game into 32 megabytes, which is how much RAM the PlayStation 2 has. Now, for those not familiar, the reason why this is significant is because generally data is copied into the RAM where it's executed. Now, because DMA decided that they wanted the environment to appear much more varied than the typical game at the time, they found that they absolutely just couldn't do it in that way. They couldn't copy things to RAM and then execute them. The regular game loading process would just not do for Grand Theft Auto 3. As such, they opted to stream data from the DVD and execute it directly from there. This allowed them essentially to never have loading. Now, it didn't mean there was no loading ever. There was loading that happened, but as you drove around, data, particularly geometry around you, NPCs, artificial intelligence, really everything was being streamed off of the disk instead of being copied into the RAM. Now, the main executable code was copied into the RAM because streaming that off of the disk would make it incredibly slow and that would suck. But a lot of the other data, in fact, most of the other data was streamed. Obviously, this meant a slower data transfer rate, but the trade-off is they were able to make a game that actually reflected the scale and size and diverse environments that they originally set out to do. It kind of appeared like a lot of stuff would pop in after you appeared in an area, but it really wasn't something that made anyone particularly upset. It worked out just fine and it felt pretty natural as you were playing the game. Plus, as you moved from area to area, there was really no loading. While a lot of the gameplay elements were essentially ones that had appeared before, they were really done in a great amount of detail. Missions had a lot more diversity than they did in the top-down days, because a lot more on-foot gameplay was kind of available. Characters appeared more interesting on account they could move, and were actually animated with motion capture. And perhaps the thing that sold the city most was the radio stations. Yes, radio stations appeared in the previous incarnations of Grand Theft Auto, but nothing like in Grand Theft Auto 3. These were all treated like real radio stations, with their own IDs, with very believable playlists, with DJs, real DJs that they hired, and clearly everybody in the audio department really cared. With a silent protagonist but a plot that actually worked, Grand Theft Auto 3 felt like living a crime movie, specifically one that involved the mafia. And while storytelling was fairly minimal, it felt believable and at least immersed you enough that you wanted to continue to find out what was happening next. Now, I'm not saying that it was some magic plot that absolutely blew everything out of the water and that the world marveled over how artistically poignant it was, but this type of storytelling was still really impressive. Over the next 2 years, DMA Design was renamed to Rockstar North while it worked on the follow-up.
Got it? 100% pure grade A Colombian, my friend. Let me see it. The greens, 10s and 20s, used. I think we have a deal, my friend. Oh, shit! Come on, get out of here, drive!
Grand Theft Auto Vice City was built on the same technology and included some great new mechanics, the most noteworthy of which was purchasing businesses, and in some cases just buildings to function as hideouts. This property management element really kind of allowed you to feel like you were actually sort of taking over the city. You weren't just completing missions in exchange for money, you were building an empire. Oh, and you were also Ray Liotta, who was the voice of the game's protagonist. As Tommy Vercetti, you had to navigate a similar plot to Grand Theft Auto 3, except for more Scarface-like and seen through the lens of the 1980s crack epidemic. The last game to use Grand Theft Auto 3's technology was Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, which aimed to tell the same crime story, albeit through a completely different lens. The intention to depict 1990s Los Angeles gang culture brought us a somewhat unexpectedly more detailed story that was about friendship and family in a way that the other games really just didn't achieve yet.
Hey, I'll take a number 9. Fat boy.
Give me a number 9 just like his. Let me get a number 6 with extra dip.
I'll have 2 number 9s, a number 9 large, a number 6 with extra dip, a number 7, 2 number 45s, 1 with cheese, and a large soda.
At its core, it was still just committing crimes with the intention of creating a crime empire, but there was actually character development, not just in the main character, but in every single character surrounding them. In all 3 games, stories hold up in their own way. San Andreas is the most believable as a modern video game story. There were also a number of pretty big developments in the gameplay, a number of them taken from another Rockstar game called Manhunt, including stealth and improved targeting controls. On top of that, they introduced some role-playing elements regarding your personal character. For instance, you could change your outfit in Vice City, but in San Andreas, It was much deeper, including clothing, accessories, haircuts, jewelry, and tattoos, and actually had an effect on NPCs' reactions to the character. You also had to eat and exercise, as well as learn different fighting styles. You were able to pick between boxing, jiu-jitsu, and wrestling, as well as responding negatively or positively to the pedestrians of the game. On top of that, San Andreas was a state, not a city. There was Los Santos, which represented Los Angeles, San Fierro, which represented San Francisco, and Las Venturas, which was Las Vegas. What made it even more unique was that you not only had access to the cities and their suburban areas, but all of the rural area in between. Certainly bigger games have been made since then, but I don't know if a game as ambitious to adapt the real world to the technology of the time has ever come out since Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. In fact, the next Grand Theft Auto returned to Liberty City and focused only on Liberty City. Role-playing elements regarding your personal character. For instance, you could change your outfit in Vice City, but in San Andreas, it was much deeper, including clothing, accessories, haircuts, jewelry, and tattoos, and actually had an effect on NPCs' reactions to the character. You also had to eat and exercise, as well as learn different fighting styles. You were able to pick between boxing, jiu-jitsu, and wrestling, as well as responding negatively or positively to the pedestrians of the game. On top of that, San Andreas was a state, not a city. There was Los Santos, which represented Los Angeles, San Fierro, which represented San Francisco, and Las Venturas, which was Las Vegas. What made it even more unique was that you not only had access to the cities and their suburban areas, but all of the rural area in between. Certainly bigger games have been made since then, but I don't know if a game as ambitious to adapt the real world to the technology of the time has ever come out since Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. In fact, the next Grand Theft Auto returned to Liberty City and focused only on Liberty City. Granted, it was a much bigger version of Liberty City than that in Grand Theft Auto 3, which Rockstar explains as each generation of games having their own versions of the city, or kind of their own shared universe. And Grand Theft Auto 4 gave us a version that was very expansive, but also more detailed than anything in San Andreas, because it took a single location and just built it to the max. Sure, the map was a little bit smaller than San Andreas, but not a lot, and considering it was all one city, it's a pretty big map. The story this time was a lot more centered on character development, even more so than San Andreas, and is simultaneously both the most impressive story out of all the Grand Theft Autos and the most limiting. The most impressive in that it's probably the most detailed, even bigger than Grand Theft Auto 5 after it, but limiting in that it's very, very linear. I don't know what it is about it, but it feels like the most linear Grand Theft Auto game. Not that you couldn't break off and do other things if you wanted to, but it really felt like a forward-moving game, which in some respects is great, and in others is kind of, it's weird. It's Grand Theft Auto, you know? And although in 2009 narrative was becoming a very important thing in video games that was being explored significantly, in part due to the contributions that Grand Theft Auto had made to gaming, it was still kind of weird.
Okay, who is she?
That's the thing. It's a guy.
Fuck you.
But the thing that you have to credit Grand Theft Auto 4 with is truly finally getting combat right. Grand Theft Auto 4 also brought us the very first online multiplayer to the Grand Theft Auto series, which had actually been planned in Grand Theft Auto 3 all the way back in 2001. It was kind of rudimentary and basically allowed 32 players to free roam across the single-player world and decide what game mode they wished to play, which included death matches, street races, and variations on cooperative and competitive play. A year later, Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars was somewhere between old school Grand Theft Auto and new school, with kind of a top-down perspective that did follow you around in a way that the third-person camera does in the newer titles, but looked a lot more similar to the old games. Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars brought in a different mechanic in the scoring of missions, telling you how good you completed the objectives. That mechanic carried over to Grand Theft Auto The Ballad of Gay Tony, which was an add-on for Grand Theft Auto 4. Between that and The Lost and the Damned, over the course of a year, they basically pulled a Vice City and San Andreas, but all in the same city, still delivering 3 radically different stories. Immediately after developing these expansions, Rockstar began work on Grand Theft Auto 5. Grand Theft Auto 5 is kind of the culmination of everything they'd been working for. So many different things came together in Grand Theft Auto 5 to make this huge, seamless multimedia experience that is tough to describe as a game itself. It's not a crime simulator. It's not a driving simulator. It's not a shooting simulator. It's not a deep narrative that has many different angles taken as it progresses. It's all of these things and more. Grand Theft Auto 5 transitions between 3 different characters in 3 different areas with 3 different stories that all interconnect, all of them having different special skills and acted just flawlessly.
I say become a doctor. You say become a patient. I say, who is that?
Hello, Missy. Wow, Franklin. You never told me that you had a sister.
I'm Denise, Franklin's housemate.
And aunt, my mother's old dried up ass.
Shut the fuck up.
Shut the fuck up!
Written incredibly well in a manner that simultaneously seems very typical and entirely self-aware. There's so many different styles of gameplay in Grand Theft Auto 5 and they nailed all of them. It's a well-oiled machine that really plays incredibly as both a sum of its parts and all of the parts individually. I could easily talk about this game and the things that came together to make this game for another 10 minutes. And on top of that, it actually created a multiplayer system that essentially functions as its own discrete economy. And no, not with microtransactions and that BS. There's a stock market in it, there's territory, there's money to be made. It's stuff that gamers have dreamed about for decades. And in many ways, one could say that Grand Theft Auto 5 realized a lot of the things people have said over the years would just be really cool if you could do in a video game. Can you imagine what's gonna happen when Grand Theft Auto 6 comes out? I know I'm gonna lose my mind. And you know what that means? The comment section, hey, how about we speculate a little bit there? If not, I'll settle for just telling me your favorite mission in any Grand Theft Auto game. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button. And if you're not subscribed, now is a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every single day of the week, and the absolute best way to see them is, of course, a subscription. As always, we thank you so much for watching this video. My name is Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter @FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on Game Ranks. Final Fantasy is a series that has been around as long as most of us have been alive, if not longer. It's a series that has looked very, very different throughout its lifetime, and has probably played one of the biggest roles in the shaping of gaming itself. Today, Game Ranks wants to bring you on a trip through the evolution of Final Fantasy. Now, for the sake of everyone's sanity, we're going to stick to the mainline Final Fantasy games, because there's an absurd number of Final Fantasy games, and if we get too far out of the main line, stuff's gonna get a little wild. The original Final Fantasy was published by Square in 1987. It's certainly not the first game of its kind, and the creators outwardly credit inspiration in Ultima and Wizardry. It has an interesting development story, but Square originally didn't want to get into the RPG genre, but the success of Dragon Quest in Japan changed their minds. The first Final Fantasy pretty much made a roadmap that would be followed throughout the entire series. There's an overworld map, town and dungeon maps, a menu screen, and a battle mode. If you've played any Final Fantasy, these probably sound very familiar. But because not every single person in the world has, the overworld map functions as a means for you to traverse the game's fictional world. The maps are usually not to scale, as if they were, your character would be the size of a castle, so it's not exactly Skyrim-type open-world transversal, but you do definitely get a sense of a large world that you're a part of. Battles could occur on the overworld, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But towns were a safe area, occupied by villagers who had things to say, and shops where you could purchase supplies. On top of that, towns were typically places where you would find an inn, where you could rest and replenish your health. In the Final Fantasy series, a town feels like a break, a minute to breathe, and sometimes a place where a lot of figuring out what we do next happens. Dungeons are places where the worst of the world resides. Monsters hiding in caves ready to pounce on you attack. but there were also treasure chests and things to be found. Battles could occur everywhere but towns, and that included dungeons. The battle system was turn-based, and all the actions that you could do occupied menus that you made selections from. When the character's turn came up, so did that menu. You selected their actions and they would perform them. There could be regular enemies, boss enemies, and you could either physically attack or use magic. This was a fantasy game, remember? And you could also use various items. Many familiar themes in the game, both in the narrative and in the music, are on display here in Final Fantasy I. The crystals and heroes of destiny from different corners of the planet coming together to save the world. The fate of everyone rested on the shoulders of some diverse heroes with amazing abilities. The story's just a bit convoluted, but for a first try, at least it's complex. To boil it down, an evil knight kidnaps a princess seeking immortality. He turns into an archdemon eventually. You end up having to go back in time 2,000 years. The graphics of Final Fantasy are actually awesome for the NES. The world of Final Fantasy was very distinct in the places you went, despite the limited palette and resolution. The creator of Final Fantasy, Hironobu Sakaguchi, never believed that it would be a series, and so he didn't design the story to be expanded to one. However, Final Fantasy I was received as such a big success on the part of Square that a sequel was inevitable. And so began the tradition of having every Final Fantasy game be its own self-contained story in its own self-contained world. The original Final Fantasy received acclaim in both Japan and in North America, but its sequel was not released in North America, instead being a Japan-only game. Final Fantasy II starts with an attack on the main characters by Black Knight soldiers and gets swept up in a resistance dedicated to ending the tyranny of an evil empire. The quest takes a lot of twists and turns, from finding mithril metal to make better weapons for the resistance, to finding out that one of the people originally attacked has taken a very different path and sided with the empire as opposed to a resistance. However, things get a lot more dire after that, and the stakes raise significantly. Final Fantasy II's systems didn't remain entirely the same from Final Fantasy I, and indicated the willingness to experiment in that the leveling did not come from experience, but rather, when you got a sword, for instance, the way you used the sword or how much you used the sword progressed your abilities with the sword. Final Fantasy II was also the first appearance of a character named Cid, which every single mainline Final Fantasy has had since, as well as chocobos, the beloved massive birds that people ride around the worlds of Final Fantasy. While Final Fantasy I's story was complex, at its root was rather rudimentary, and pretty much everybody stayed alive. More emotional aspects of the story started to appear in Final Fantasy II, with 6 deaths on the side of good, and different relationships started and explored within the dialogue. The last Final Fantasy to appear on the NES was Final Fantasy III. The story of Final Fantasy III is about 4 orphans who explore a hidden cabin opened up by an earthquake and find the Crystal of Light. The crystal gives them various parts of its power, which essentially amounts to giving them jobs, because Final Fantasy III introduced the job system. For instance, you had your knights, your bards, your Vikings, your archers, etc. Jobs had special skills. For instance, thieves could steal, and several different classes could cast spells. But the battle system remained turn-based and pretty similar to how it always had been. Final Fantasy IV came out in 1991. In North America, it was known as Final Fantasy II, as Final Fantasy II and III had not been released stateside. Now, obviously, this caused a lot of confusion later, but thankfully, they've renumbered everything stateside as well, because we have access to all the games now, at least in some form. Final Fantasy IV has some serious credit to its name. And obviously the stories prior to this contain dramatic elements, but most of what people consider dramatic storytelling in modern games is on display in Final Fantasy IV. But the game itself was only about 1/4 of the script that had been written for it. The cartridges just couldn't hold the entire script, so unnecessary lines of dialogue was cut. Now, nobody really has any idea whether this improved the game or not, but often limitations create conditions where better things are made. The story of Final Fantasy IV involves a knight named Cecil questioning the king There's love interests, there's forbidden spells, there's dire consequences, and it contains just about everything that people expect from a Final Fantasy story. Final Fantasy IV was built on the best ideas from the previous Final Fantasy games, from the fleshed out combat of Final Fantasy III, the more complex story of Final Fantasy II, and 4 elemental bosses acting as symbols in the game from Final Fantasy I. One of the main themes of the game was that brute strength alone isn't necessarily power, and the story really emphasized friendship and a large and diverse cast. It also involves a pretty serious jump in quality and graphics, as they had a significantly larger color palette to be working with. One could say that the first 4 Final Fantasy games are really the process of creating the Final Fantasy formula, what became Final Fantasy for decades. These games are all impressive in their own right and contain different elements of what we know as today's Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy V didn't really bring us any massive jumps in the ideas, however, it did refine everything. The story is again about 4 elemental objects, this time crystals, and a meteor that has fallen and created curiosity. The crystals seal away an ultimate evil that the cast of characters wish to stop the resurgence of. The story itself is not really looked at as a fantastic one for Final Fantasy. However, the job system that was used here was looked at as heavily refined. You were able to combine abilities from different job classes, and in theory have every single character master all 22 jobs. Every character would earn experience points and level up, but they'd also learn a job with ability points. You might note that this sounds a lot like today's RPG's skill trees, and is most certainly the ancestor. Sometimes the game itself feels repetitive, and this is due to a very high encounter rate, and again that the story is sometimes a little bit weak. But all in all, it's an incredibly worthwhile addition to the series, as it did so much refining of the game's systems that it's hard to believe that Final Fantasy VI could have happened if Final Fantasy V hadn't. And not just in a numerical way. If a different game had been Final Fantasy V, I think Final Fantasy VI would have been significantly different as well. Now, there's a lot of debate over the next 2 entries. A lot of people consider them both to be the best JRPG of all time, and a lot of other people like to argue about that, but let's not get into it. Really, all of the Final Fantasy games are phenomenal in their own ways, and though sometimes maybe a little bit painful, are extremely important in the development of video games themselves. Final Fantasy VI did something very strange. It put Final Fantasy in a steampunk environment, where all of the previous titles were set in a medieval high fantasy environment. It's very interesting because there's things like railroads and steamships, but also mechs, chainsaws, and drills. Magic and science are kind of combined into one thing known as Magitech, which are programs created by the Empire to create weaponry, and the narrative does a fantastic job at using the environment to comment on technology, science, and the unknown. The story is extremely non-linear for a Final Fantasy game and diverts in many different directions that you get to choose a lot of different things in. It also does a lot in order to make sure there isn't a specific protagonist. Instead, it wants you to look at the cast of characters as the protagonists. Everyone has their own role, everyone has a purpose, and everyone develops as a person. What's also great is that Kefka, the villain in the series, is not some mythological creature or monster or sorcerer from years past. He's just a guy. In a way, he symbolizes all people and what happens when absolute power is bestowed on them. Final Fantasy VI knocked it out of the park on every level, but the game that really took the world by storm in a way that a game really hadn't before is Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII was an entire revamp of everything we know about Final Fantasy. While Final Fantasy VI went for steampunk, Final Fantasy VII went for cyberpunk. There were no evil empires. In fact, the government didn't really exist. It was formally there, but nobody ever really talked about it, and it had no power in any way. Instead, a power corporation by the name of Shinra ran the planet, and it ran it exactly how you might expect, tyrannically. But there are much bigger threats in the game that all revolved around a mysterious person named Sephiroth and his quest to become a god. We learned about the history of the planet, we learned about what Shinra was doing to the planet, we learned about much bigger threats of the likes of Meteor and Sephiroth, but most of all we learned about the protagonist, and we learned about him on a level we never would have. We got so deep into Cloud's psyche We learned about who he loves, what he doesn't like about himself, how much he's lying to himself about everything, and we never really got that deep into a video game character's head. I mean, it's not like many different developers had made attempts, but this was just something different. It was on a level that we hadn't seen before, and a lot of it was told through pre-rendered cutscenes. In fact, these became a ubiquitous part of gaming in general, having parts of the story told in animated sequences that weren't in the game engine are something that really went on for quite a while, and it started here, or at very least was popularized here. Aside from a major upgrade in the graphics, having polygonal characters and pre-rendered backgrounds, the game also featured an entirely 3D overworld map and entirely 3D battles. Battles were probably the most exciting Final Fantasy battles had ever been. They brought the team down to 3 rather than 4 that we'd previously seen in pretty much every Final Fantasy game, and introduced a new feature to the active time battle system called the limit break. When you were hit in a battle, your limit meter would increase, and when you filled it up, you could use a special attack that you would gradually unlock as you leveled up. Final Fantasy's magic system isn't based on espers, or magic, or jobs, or anything like that. The magic system directly interfaces with the story. What everything is powered on, what has given Shinra its power in the world, is Mako, which they drill out of the planet and refine energy from. The magic system uses materia, which are small bits of condensed Mako energy, which generally appears as a liquid, but as a materia is obviously a solid. Every materia has different properties, and materia gets stronger from use. Final Fantasy VII is generally regarded for having popularized the Japanese role-playing game outside Japan. Yes, Final Fantasy VI was successful. Yes, Chrono Trigger was successful. But nothing on the level of Final Fantasy VII had ever happened, at least in that genre. It would be really hard to follow it up, and Final Fantasy VIII did everything it could to build on that success, and in some ways really did build on it as far as the relationships between characters, and created a very beautiful postmodern semi-utopia, but a lot of the time was very confusing, and many people weren't always sure exactly what was going on. That being said, it had a lot of good elements to it. For instance, the love story that took center stage was perhaps one of the first that took place in such a high-profile game. The battle system was significantly changed between Final Fantasy VII and VIII, relying on a card-based system, which divided people a great deal. There are some people that think that the draw card system is perhaps the best thing that's ever happened, and I'm not joking about that. There are people who really love that battle system, and there are people that view it as too much of a departure. It's certainly innovated in that it reflected elements of card games that have become significantly more popular through the years. It's actually incredibly interesting to think about. Card games have always been popular, but not on the level they are now. Final Fantasy VIII, in many ways, tried a lot of new things, and it's to be commended for that. And it did really well. It got very high scores, albeit a little bit more split than Final Fantasy VII, and it sold really well. Its bizarreness can be alienating, but in other ways can be extremely interesting. As Square seems to do with Final Fantasy, after a few innovative games, they tend to do a game where they do sort of a retrospective on what they've been doing, go back through everything that they've done, take the best concepts and put them together into one thing. You could call Final Fantasy IV that, Final Fantasy VI that, and Final Fantasy IX that. Final Fantasy IX, by all accounts, looks the most like a traditional Final Fantasy game since Final Fantasy V. It's set in a world that feels very fantasy, very medieval. It certainly had the upgraded graphics, and in a lot of ways was the best looking of the PlayStation Final Fantasies, while also feeling very traditional, and even in its own way very nostalgic. Then along came Final Fantasy X, which is a shockingly huge game. Final Fantasy X was bright and colorful and pretty, but at the same time had a very depressing sort of downtrodden feel to it, because you sort of knew everything was coming to a head in a bad way. Final Fantasy X modernized so many aspects of Final Fantasy, but at the same time took a slight step back in the battle system, moving from the active time battle to something they called conditional turn-based. The game also had a rather ingenious way of leveling called the sphere grid that could pretty much allow for any upgrade path for any character. For instance, if you want to make the main character Tidus into a healer,
a white mage type? You could. Just as you could make Yuna, his love interest, who is by nature a white mage, into a brawler. But aside from an innovative leveling system, it also contains something that kind of blew everyone's mind: voice acting with facial animation, and a lot of it. The game has a more realistic style in its art, but it's heavily influenced by Final Fantasy III. Its battle system absolutely reeks of Final Fantasy III, and that's awesome for an MMORPG. It wasn't necessarily as detailed and beautiful, but Final Fantasy XI definitely had a depth to it that was not really possible in any other Final Fantasy title, in that you had a lot more freedom within the game world. It's also been widely touted as the most profitable Final Fantasy of all time. Final Fantasy XII hit in 2006 and is the first Final Fantasy with a truly open world, although it is split into zones. It's also the first Final Fantasy with a seamless battle system, as in, you encounter enemies on the map and you fight them on the map. But Final Fantasy XII really implements these ideas very well. It also runs off of something called the license system, which is not entirely unlike the sphere grid from Final Fantasy X, but does actually kind of function in a manner that it feels in-world, which is very neat. It also takes place on the same planet that Final Fantasy Tactics and Vagrant Story supposedly do, and anybody who played Vagrant Story can definitely see the influence on Final Fantasy XII. Next came Final Fantasy XIII, which continued the AI battle partner dynamic, but offered a new way of controlling it, which was the paradigm shift. What's interesting about paradigm shift is it works kind of like the job system, but more as a means of governing the character. Final Fantasy XIII used active time battle, but the secondary characters were AI controlled. You would switch their paradigm, which included things like Commando, Saboteur, Mage, Knight, etc., and they would perform different sets of actions depending on the skills that they had. There was a lot of debate over this system, but generally it worked pretty well. It created very fast-paced battles that, despite still being a command-based battle system, felt very kinetic. The story of Final Fantasy XIII involves a world called Cocoon. The world itself is not a traditional world, but rather regions encased in an orb, so to speak, a cocoon. It's a fun game that is too linear for too much of the game. It does eventually open up, but still, the story is at least engaging, and it spawned 2 sequels, and Troy Baker's in it. Final Fantasy XIV, however, Final Fantasy XIV was launched as basically a disaster. In many aspects, it was a legitimately broken game. The engine was bad, the systems were bad, and everything just came out weird. But what people hated the absolute most was the user interface for the game. It was clunky, it was ugly, and it was distracting. Final Fantasy XIII's game engine was used to create an essentially linear game, and an MMORPG that works right is anything but linear. In many respects, that was at the center of a lot of the problems with the engine. Fortunately, Square understood that this was such a failure that they completely revamped the game itself. New engine, amended storyline, and servers that worked. Over the course of its life, Final Fantasy XIV has went from unmitigated disaster to a pretty respectable game, and was generally regarded as one of the best MMOs of the last several years. Bringing us to the present. Square is a company that has learned a great deal about what exactly people want from them, because they've tried so many different things. It's not a mainline Final Fantasy game, but Final Fantasy Type O introduced a non-turn-based gameplay structure that was received actually very well, and Final Fantasy 15 has done the same. First off, Final Fantasy 15 is obviously the best looking Final Fantasy game that's ever happened. It takes this sort of techno-utopian idea that we've seen in some Final Fantasy games, but sort of adds a road trip element to it. And there's royalty, but the place in the world they fit is just sort of bizarre in a way. In any case, you're Prince Noctis, heir to the throne. And since it's new, we won't get too deep into the story. I highly recommend you play it because it just develops the idea of open world in a way that I
can't attack